What if the sun, the most reliable presence in our sky, suddenly became unpredictable, not because of anything happening inside it, but because of something racing toward it? That's what astronomers are whispering tonight. The object is called 3IATLAS, the third interstellar visitor ever discovered. At first glance, it was just a faint smear of light, a cold traveler passing through. But as its orbit carried it closer to the sun, the story began to shift, from curiosity to fear. In cosmic terms, this is no routine comet. Its trajectory, its brightness, even the strange disturbances trailing in its wake suggest it carries more than ice and dust. Some scientists have begun asking, is 3IATLAS dragging something with it? And this is where the unease sets in, because every time we've tracked an object like this, whether it was oumuamua in 2017 or Borisov in 2019, it forced us to confront uncomfortable questions about what moves between the stars. 3IATLAS is no different, only this time it is falling toward the heart of our solar system. Think about that for a moment. An interstellar object formed in a different sun's nursery, now headed into ours. The last time humanity saw something like this, we walked away with more questions than answers. And now, with telescopes tuned to Atlas's approach, the fear is not just about what it is, but what it might trigger once it brushes near the sun's magnetic fields. Because when foreign bodies pass too close to the sun, things happen. Solar flares intensify, plasma storms ripple outward, and sometimes, as records from ancient astronomers suggest, skies fill with strange lights, comets split apart, and Earth feels the consequences centuries later. So scientists are watching nervously, not because they expect the end of the world tomorrow, but because this is uncharted territory. We've never monitored an interstellar body plunging this deep toward our star, with instruments as sensitive as the ones we have today. Every flicker of its tail, every unexpected brightening, feels like a message. Is 3IATLAS simply another frozen relic from the galaxy's vast ocean? Or is it the first domino in a chain of solar events we're not ready for? And as we drift together into this mystery, let me pause just briefly. Where in the world are you listening tonight? I find it remarkable how many curious minds gather in this quiet corner of the internet. If you're enjoying this sleepy exploration, a gentle like and subscribe helps keep the journey flowing, and it means you'll never miss the next step into the unknown. But why fear an object like this at all? Comets pass close to the sun all the time. Why is 3IATLAS different? The answer lies not in what we see, but in what we don't. Typical comets behave like clockwork. Their ice vaporizes, their tails brighten, their paths bend in predictable ways. But Atlas has begun to drift from the script. Its tail flares unexpectedly, its core dims and then pulses back, as if something inside is resisting the heat. To astronomers, this unpredictability is unsettling. It suggests there are forces at work we cannot yet name. One team compared its outbursts to heartbeat rhythms, almost like the object is alive in cycles. Of course, it isn't alive, at least not in the way we define life. But the metaphor sticks, because the object seems to act with its own stubborn personality. And then there's its speed. Atlas is moving faster than many models predicted. It's as though the sun's gravity isn't the only thing pulling it. Some scientists whisper about hidden companions, fragments, or perhaps other interstellar debris drawn along in its slipstream. If true, Atlas may not be a lone visitor at all. It may be the tip of a spear, with more unknowns trailing silently behind. Now imagine what happens when such an object dives through the sun's magnetic field. That field is not a quiet ocean. It's a storm of plasma and radiation, rippling outward to the edge of the solar system. A disturbance there can ripple for millions of kilometers. Could Atlas act like a stone tossed into that fiery sea? Could its arrival stir solar storms strong enough to touch Earth? The thought is both thrilling and frightening. Because while we understand the sun better than any other star, it still surprises us. The Carrington event of 1859, the solar flare that lit telegraph wires on fire, was not predicted. What might happen when the sun meets a true outsider? This is where fear begins to creep into the voices of even seasoned scientists. Not panic, but humility. They know the universe loves to remind us how fragile our understanding really is. And as Atlas races closer to the sun's furnace, the clock ticks toward a moment when theory will give way to revelation. So the question lingers: will 3IATLAS burn quietly into ash, just another cometary tombstone? Or will its dive awaken forces in our star that humanity has never witnessed before? To understand the danger, we have to talk about the sun itself. We often imagine it as steady, eternal, a golden lamp in the sky. But in truth, the sun is restless. It breathes in 11-year cycles, its surface bubbling with magnetic storms, flares and eruptions that can lash out across millions of miles. And right now, the sun is entering one of its more violent moods: solar maximum. Sunspots multiply, flares erupt without warning, and streams of charged particles surge into space. It's during these peaks that Earth's satellites shiver, astronauts shelter, and auroras spill further south than anyone expects. Into this furnace, 3IATLAS is diving. That timing is no coincidence. It's fate. The sun is more volatile now than at almost any other moment, and Atlas is threading the storm's eye. Scientists are quick to remind us that comets have flown into the sun's embrace before, but Atlas carries a different kind of tension. Its path is so steep, so direct, that it will skim magnetic fields at their most chaotic. Think of it as a fragile shard of glass dropped into a bonfire. Will it shatter instantly, or could it twist the flames into something new? The possibility is not just theoretical. We've seen small comets trigger ripples in the sun's corona before, faint waves visible only through sensitive instruments. If a small comet can leave such fingerprints, what might an interstellar object do? One hardened by ages of drifting between stars. That is where fear begins, because in space, small causes can echo into vast effects. What makes 3IATLAS truly unnerving is its outsider's pedigree. It does not belong here. Every comet we've catalogued was born alongside the sun, shaped by the same disk of dust and gas. Their behavior, while sometimes dramatic, is part of a family pattern. But Atlas is no kin. Its orbit betrays its origin, a parabolic arc, too elongated, too fast, to be bound by our star. It came from the interstellar dark, and it will return there once its close pass is complete. That means its chemistry, its density, its very structure may be unlike anything we've ever touched. Telescopes hint at strange ratios of elements in its coma. Too much carbon, too little water, an odd mixture that suggests it was forged in a colder, harsher nursery than our sun's. One astronomer described it as a messenger from a place we'll never see. But here's the question: can such a messenger survive the sun's wrath? Or will it crack open, revealing secrets buried since the dawn of its birth system? The thought is tantalizing, because if it does fragment, we may glimpse a piece of matter untouched since another star's creation, a time capsule billions of years old. Yet with that possibility comes a shadow. Fragments don't always fall harmlessly. They scatter, sometimes into unpredictable orbits. And some scientists wonder, what if one of those fragments doesn't leave? What if one stays? The mystery deepens, the story pulls tighter, and the closer Atlas drifts to the sun, the more it feels like we are standing at the edge of a revelation or a reckoning. If 3IATLAS feels like a ghost entering our solar system, that's because it is not the first. Astronomers remember 2017 when a strange cigar-shaped rock called oumuamua sailed through, spinning oddly without the trailing tail of a comet. Then, in 2019, a second visitor appeared, 2I Borisov, a more familiar icy body, yet still alien in origin. Each left behind questions that only deepened our hunger. Oumuamua seemed to accelerate slightly as it left, as though pushed by something more than sunlight. Borisov's chemistry was exotic, its ratios of carbon monoxide and water inconsistent with local comets. And now, Atlas arrives as the third interstellar interloper. But unlike the others, it is not quietly passing by. Its path is intimate, plunging toward the sun in a suicidal dive. Where the others glanced at our system and slipped away, Atlas seems determined to collide with our star's very heart. This choice of trajectory unsettles scientists, because chance alone should scatter visitors randomly. Yet here we are, facing a pattern. One object elongated and odd, one fast and icy, and now one burning itself in the sun's crown. Patterns ignite suspicion. Are these just natural coincidences, or could something be guiding these travelers? The cosmos does not speak plainly. It hints, it suggests, it leaves riddles instead of answers. Even the ancients sensed this. Comets were called omens, skyborne messengers. Modern astronomy stripped away the superstition, replacing it with physics, equations, orbital mechanics. Yet staring at Atlas's suicidal plunge, it's hard not to feel the echo of those older fears. Could Atlas be more than debris? Could its sacrifice at the sun's altar be part of some greater cycle, one that spans not centuries, but eons? We don't know. But the very uncertainty is what draws us deeper, one step closer to a mystery the universe is daring us to confront. Here is where the story sharpens. Resonance. In astronomy, resonance means two bodies falling into a rhythm, like Jupiter's moons, locked into gravitational dances that keep them aligned. But resonance doesn't only shape orbits, it can shape energy, it can magnify chaos. And scientists whisper that 3IATLAS may strike such a resonance with the sun itself, not by colliding, but by disturbing the solar magnetic fields at precisely the wrong moment. Think of a singer shattering glass with a note. The voice alone has little force, but if it matches the glass's frequency, the structure collapses. Now, scale that metaphor to the sun, a star in its maximum cycle of activity, primed with storms, arcs and flares. What happens if Atlas sings the right note as it dives through the corona? Theorists sketch dark possibilities. A coronal mass ejection magnified beyond expectation. A chain reaction across the solar magnetic field, flares popping like fireworks in every direction. The Earth's shielding magnetosphere is strong but not invincible. History records solar storms that knocked out telegraphs, satellites, even entire grids. Those were caused by ordinary fluctuations. What happens if something alien adds fuel to the fire? The idea terrifies not because it is certain, but because it is possible. Science lives in probabilities, not absolutes. Even a 1% chance of resonance is enough to make researchers uneasy. And yet, others argue the opposite. Perhaps Atlas will reveal resilience, showing us that the sun is far more stable than we fear. Perhaps it will pass harmlessly, its dust swept into golden arcs, a reminder of how tiny we are in the face of stellar power. But the fear lingers because we know resonance is real. We see it in planets, in moons, in rings of dust circling gas giants. And if it exists there, why not here? It leaves us with a haunting image. An interstellar shard threading the magnetic symphony of our sun, striking a note that could echo through every corner of our solar system. Imagine for a moment that the sun is not silent. For billions of years, we've treated it as a roaring, burning engine, constant, unfeeling, predictable. But new research suggests the sun may respond more delicately than we thought. Like a great drum, it vibrates with oscillations. Deep inside, pressure waves ripple through plasma, creating rhythms called helioseismic modes. Most of the time, these rhythms are stable, drowned in the roar of nuclear fire. But what happens if an interstellar object, dense, charged, cloaked in volatile gases, threads its way through those rhythms at just the wrong moment? Some physicists whisper about stellar triggers, events so small they should mean nothing, yet when placed at the right point in time and space, they tilt the balance. On Earth, a tiny landslide can unleash an avalanche. On the Sun, perhaps a single interstellar visitor can disturb a cycle already straining at its limits. Atlas's trajectory makes the idea unsettling. It will not skim the edges. It will dive into the crown of the star, where plasma arcs twist and snap, storing energy like taut wires. If it adds even a fraction of resonance, just enough to nudge the sun's magnetic storm belts, the effects could cascade. And here's where mystery meets fear. Ancient cultures often described the sun as a conscious being, Ra steering his boat across the sky, Surya radiating life, Tonatiuh demanding sacrifice. Science stripped away those myths, yet in moments like this, we wonder if they sensed something deeper, that the sun does not merely burn, but reacts. If Atlas is the spark that forces a reaction, then the question changes. We are not asking whether it will collide. We are asking whether the sun will answer back. To grasp the scale of that possibility, we turn to Earth's history. There have been moments when the planet itself bore the scars of cosmic tantrums. In 1859, the Carrington event blasted through the atmosphere. Telegraph lines caught fire, auroras shimmered as far south as Cuba, compasses spun wildly. It was only chance that humanity was still primitive in its technology. If a storm of that magnitude struck today, satellites would fail, power grids collapse, cities fall into blackout, billions could be left disconnected in an instant. Now, consider this. The Carrington event was caused by nothing more exotic than a solar flare and a coronal ejection. Imagine what happens if Atlas magnifies one beyond precedent. The flare could become a storm not just recorded in human history, but etched into planetary memory. Ice cores in Antarctica hold evidence of such events. Layers rich with nitrates and beryllium hint at radiation bursts long before satellites existed. Some are so intense, scientists still debate what caused them. Were they massive solar storms? Or did something alien, something external, trigger them? The terrifying possibility is that Atlas is not unique. It may be part of a long pattern, visitors arriving every few centuries, each adding fuel to the sun's unpredictable moods. We see a ghost of it in myths about sky fires and burning nights. Legends may simply be distorted memories of ancient storms. And here is where mystery grips us most tightly. Atlas may reveal not just the sun's power, but its vulnerability. It is not the unshakable furnace we assumed. It is alive in its own way, capable of moods, swings, and outbursts. If Atlas disturbs that fragile balance, the echoes will not stop at Earth. They will ripple across every planet, every moon, every satellite circling our star. The whole solar system may feel the tremor of a single shard of rock daring to sing to the sun. What if Atlas isn't just a rock tumbling through interstellar space? What if, in crossing the void, it carries with it something more? Not a message we can read, but a trigger waiting for the right conditions. For decades, astronomers have noticed curious timing in the universe. Gamma-ray bursts striking seemingly at random, fast radio bursts, millisecond pulses of energy arriving from billions of light-years away, yet somehow repeating. These signals have long puzzled scientists. Most assume they are natural, the echoes of dying stars or colliding neutron remnants. But another possibility lingers. What if they are alarms, warnings, or even coordinates? Here's the unsettling part. Atlas's arrival aligns with one of these bursts. Only days before astronomers first tracked it, a repeating FRB, catalogued as 2025A, flared in a distant galaxy. Coincidence? Perhaps. But if we consider Atlas as part of a chain, then maybe that burst was the key unlocking its next behavior, the way a remote signal can awaken a dormant probe. Picture this: a shard of alien engineering wrapped in the disguise of an ordinary comet. It drifts unnoticed for centuries, even millennia, until a signal, faint, directed, intentional, whispers across space, not loud enough for us to notice, but precisely tuned to ignite what hides inside. And here's where it chills us. The Perseverance rover is drilling on Mars. The Parker Solar Probe is kissing the edges of the sun. Our technology is everywhere, broadcasting without pause. What if our signals were never neutral? What if humanity has been shouting into the void, and Atlas is the one who finally answers back? Scientists already know our transmissions leak endlessly. Radio waves, television broadcasts, military radar, each one escapes Earth and races outward. For nearly a century, our presence has been announced to the cosmos. We never stop to ask who might be listening. Now, the timing feels impossible to ignore. As Atlas plunges toward the sun, we have to wonder, are we witnessing a natural object reacting by chance, or are we staring at the first stage of a cosmic conversation we never meant to start? To understand the danger, we must step back, not into the future, but into the deep past. The sun has moods, cycles, and scars recorded across millennia, and some of them scientists are only now learning to read. Tree rings in ancient cedar forests in Japan reveal strange spikes of carbon-14. Ice cores drilled from Greenland hold signatures of sudden beryllium floods. Both point to cosmic radiation events far beyond what the sun should normally unleash. Events powerful enough to alter Earth's chemistry, scorch its skies, and destabilize its climate. For decades, these anomalies were mysteries, footnotes in scientific papers. Now they have a name: Miyake events. Spikes so violent they dwarf even the Carrington event. And here's the nightmare thought: no one knows what caused them. Were they supernovae close enough to singe Earth? Or were they solar outbursts, eruptions larger than anything we've ever seen in the modern era? This is where Atlas becomes terrifying. Its path coincides with the kind of orbital geometry that, if mirrored in the past, might explain these anomalies. A visitor brushes too close. The sun stirs, flares, lashes out. Earth records the scar, but humanity at the time has no words to explain it. They turn to myth, sky gods, fire dragons, divine punishment, and maybe that's the real history. Not gods, not curses, but interstellar objects like Atlas repeatedly brushing our star into fits of fury, a cycle repeating every few centuries. Each time humanity left bewildered. Each time, a reminder that the sun is not simply ours to predict or control. Today, the stakes are higher. Our satellites thread Earth's orbit like fragile beads. Our networks span continents. Our dependence on technology makes us more vulnerable than any civilization before. If Atlas awakens the sun again, it won't just be a mystery etched into tree rings or ice cores. It will be a catastrophe we all experience simultaneously in real time. And so the question lingers: is Atlas just another stone, or is it the next page in a solar memory still writing itself, one that humanity may be forced to read whether we are ready or not? Long before telescopes, long before equations, ancient people looked upward and saw signs in the heavens. Comets especially were feared. Streaks of light that appeared suddenly, unpredictable, often followed by disaster. To them, the sky itself seemed alive, writing warnings across the dark. In Chinese chronicles, comets were called broom stars, sweeping away dynasties. In Norse sagas, fiery serpents writhed through the night, seen as omens of Ragnarok. And among the Maya, celestial visitors marked turning points in their calendar, moments when worlds ended and new ones began. These weren't simply superstitions, they were attempts to understand. Every culture that watched the skies knew. Comets arrive when the earth trembles, when rulers fall, when plagues spread. The connection wasn't always causal, but the pattern was too striking to ignore. Now picture Atlas. It races toward the sun, its coma glowing, its tail lengthening like a serpent uncoiling across the void. To the ancients, this would not be just a rock. It would be the return of the sky serpent, heralding upheaval. A messenger, not random, but deliberate. Modern science strips away the myth, yet the unease remains. Because the truth is, comets do bring change. Not through prophecy, but through physics. Impacts alter ecosystems. Close approaches disturb solar winds. And the psychological weight they carry has shaped decisions of kings and generals for millennia. Here's the haunting twist. What if ancient myths weren't exaggerations, but memories? Encoded warnings from cultures who had seen what happens when an interstellar visitor brushes too close to the sun. Their stories painted serpents and gods because they lacked our vocabulary. But what they were really describing were disruptions, skyfire, solar storms, and Atlas, gleaming against the night sky today, feels like the continuation of that same story. Not just science, not just myth, but the intersection of both. A cycle repeating, and humanity once again on the receiving end of the message. But what if there's something else at play? Something far more unsettling than myths or solar storms? What if Atlas is not the first interstellar object we've seen, but simply the latest in a chain, a pattern we've only just begun to notice? Oumuamua in 2017 startled astronomers with its strange acceleration. Borisov in 2019 reminded us the galaxy does not respect our boundaries. Now Atlas, stranger still, weaving a trajectory that feels less random with each passing calculation. Here's where the questions multiply. If interstellar objects are common, why are we only now seeing them? Have they always been here, but invisible until our instruments became sensitive enough? Or, and this is the darker possibility, is something guiding them, choosing when they arrive? Some researchers whisper about the idea of sentinel probes. Not spacecraft in the way we build them, but fragments designed to appear natural, hiding in plain sight until conditions demand activation. Carl Sagan himself once speculated about ancient probes watching our solar system silently, waiting. To the public, it sounded like science fiction, but the mathematics of probability suggests otherwise. If the galaxy is filled with civilizations, wouldn't at least one of them seed the stars with watchers? Now imagine Atlas under that lens. It drifts close, not to deliver a message, but to observe, to record how we respond when faced with something we cannot explain. Perhaps it isn't just rock and ice at all, but memory, alien memory, carried in its core, transmitting silently as it brushes the sun. And what's more unnerving, if this is a watcher, then we are not its first audience. Others, long before us, may have been tested. Civilizations we will never know, reduced to myths of sky serpents and divine punishments. Maybe we are simply the latest in a long chain of watchers and the watched. So as Atlas cuts closer to the sun, the question grows louder. Are we witnessing a random visitor, or are we participating, unknowingly, in a cosmic experiment that has been running for longer than human history itself? Every great story in the cosmos eventually bends toward the sun. It is our star, our lifeline, the engine of everything we know, but it is also a mystery. A roaring nuclear furnace wrapped in layers of plasma, unpredictable and dangerous. And Atlas is heading straight toward it. Astronomers know that comets which venture too close are called sun grazers. Some shatter instantly, their frozen bodies boiling into vapor. Others, strangely, survive the encounter, slingshotting away, glowing brighter, as though they've passed through some kind of trial. But here's the unsettling part. Atlas's trajectory doesn't just skim the sun. It seems almost calculated, threading through gravitational corridors, paths that lead objects not to destruction but to amplification. It's as if the sun itself is a kind of hidden gate, testing what enters its sphere and deciding what survives. Think about this. For ancient Egyptians, the sun was Ra's chariot, disappearing into the underworld each night only to be reborn. In Hindu texts, Surya rode his golden chariot pulled by 7 horses, a symbol of renewal and transformation. Every culture saw the sun not just as a star, but as a threshold, a place where matter and spirit, life and death collide. And now Atlas approaches it. What will emerge on the other side? A shattered shell of rock and ice, or something more enigmatic, something transformed by the sun's unimaginable power? Some scientists speculate that sun-grazing comets may carry more than dust. They could release complex organic molecules forged in the cold between the stars, showering them into the inner solar system. Others suggest a stranger possibility, that comets are seeded deliberately, using stars as amplifiers, broadcasting life across the galaxy. If that's true, then Atlas's near miss with the sun is not a random event. It's a message, or perhaps even a delivery, a reminder that the sun is not just a star. It is a gate, and sometimes what passes through does not return the same. When a comet nears the sun, it doesn't just glow, it sings. Not in sound, but in waves. Charged particles stream off, interacting with the solar wind, creating radio frequencies that hum across the void. Astronomers with sensitive instruments pick up these emissions, static bursts, oscillating tones, strange harmonics. Most comets produce random noise, but what if Atlas doesn't? Already, data from early observations suggest peculiar fluctuations in its outgassing. Jets of vapor burst from its surface in intervals, not chaotic but rhythmic. To most, it's a curiosity. To a few, it's something more alarming, a possible signal. In 1977, the WOW signal stunned astronomers, a 72-second burst of radio waves from deep space that looked suspiciously like a transmission. It was never repeated. To this day, it remains unexplained. Now, some wonder if Atlas might be producing a similar effect, but on a closer, more deliberate scale. Imagine this: a comet engineered to look natural, but designed to broadcast as it nears a star. Its frozen surface stores information, molecules vibrating in coded patterns, released only when sunlight strikes them. A universal language hidden in chemistry, waiting for a receiver intelligent enough to notice. The terrifying possibility is that we're not the intended audience. The signal may be directed outward, not inward, toward watchers already stationed at the edge of our system, waiting for confirmation, as though Atlas's approach is less a journey and more a trigger, a key turning in a lock. And here's the question nobody wants to ask. If this is a signal, then what happens next? Do the watchers stay silent, satisfied with the message, or do they respond, stepping out of the shadows we've never dared to illuminate? For now, the data remain ambiguous, lost in the hum of cosmic radiation. But as Atlas cuts closer to the sun, instruments will keep listening, because somewhere in the noise there might be a pattern, and patterns, especially in the cosmos, are never accidents. Every telescope, no matter how powerful, has a limit. Beyond that limit, our instruments blur, distort, or fall silent, and it's precisely at those edges of perception that the most unsettling things tend to appear. Astronomers tracking Atlas have noticed something odd. It isn't just the comet itself that captures their attention, it's what seems to follow. Faint objects, shadows barely distinguishable from background stars, appear in its wake. Some call them artifacts, glitches in the software that stitches telescope images together, but others whisper a stranger theory, that Atlas is not traveling alone. History gives us precedent. In 1994, When comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 approached Jupiter, it broke into more than 20 fragments, strung out like beads on a cosmic necklace before colliding with the giant planet. But Atlas's companions don't behave like fragments. They maintain distance. They shift subtly, as if adjusting course. Not debris, then, but perhaps something more deliberate. Consider the chilling possibility. If Atlas is carrying a signal, as some believe, what better way to ensure its reception than to send receivers trailing close behind? Objects disguised as ordinary rocks, small enough to be overlooked, but engineered to awaken when the time is right. Silent watchers embedded in the shadows of the comet, riding its path like loyal sentinels. In ancient myth, comets were always omens, not solitary wanderers, but heralds of something approaching. The Chinese called them broom stars, sweeping change across heaven. Medieval Europeans feared them as swords of flame, cutting destinies. And always, always, they were said to travel with company, unseen armies, spirits, or gods returning with fire. Now, as Atlas nears the sun, the shadows grow clearer. We may be watching not just a comet, but a caravan, one that does not care if we notice, because the message may already have been delivered. If Atlas is part of a pattern, then perhaps we've seen it before, and simply forgotten. The ancients were relentless sky watchers. They tracked the heavens with an intensity we rarely match today. On clay tablets from Babylon, on Mayan stelae in Egyptian tombs, comets are carved and painted again and again, not as passing curiosities, but as turning points. One Akkadian text speaks of a torch star that appeared, flaring brightly, then vanishing into the sun. Afterward, records describe drought, collapse, and silence. To the Babylonians, this was no coincidence. It was a warning, ignored, then fulfilled. Fast forward to modern times. In 1910, Halley's Comet swung past Earth. Newspapers panicked the public with headlines about poisonous cyanogen gas in its tail. Of course, nothing happened. Or did it? That same year, revolutions simmered, empires cracked, and within 4 years, the First World War consumed millions. Coincidence or rhythm? Here's the unsettling part. When researchers align comet appearances with human history, eerie overlaps emerge. Great comets in the sky often precede moments of upheaval, famines, plagues, or sudden cultural shifts. It's as though civilizations sense, on some deep unconscious level, that the arrival of such objects is not just astronomical, but existential. So what does that mean for Atlas? Its trajectory, cutting dangerously close to the sun, mirrors those ancient descriptions. Its brightness, out of proportion for its size, recalls torch stars feared by Babylonian scribes. And its timing, just as our world stands at a fragile crossroads, technologically advanced, yet vulnerable, divided, uncertain. What if Atlas is not merely a comet, but part of that same cycle? A reminder echoing through centuries, appearing again and again, each time nudging civilizations into transformation. We may not remember the warning, but the sky does, and the question lingers. Is Atlas the messenger or the message itself? Every comet is changed by the sun. Ice boils into vapor. Dust streams behind like a burning banner. But Atlas has begun to behave differently. As it draws nearer, its tail lengthens far beyond what its size should allow. Spectrographic data show unusual emissions, spikes of ionized particles that don't match the standard cometary recipe of water, carbon dioxide, and dust. Instead, astronomers are seeing signatures that suggest metals, even traces of complex hydrocarbons, behaving as if arranged in patterns. The sun, too, is responding. Solar physicists watching sunspot activity report curious flares aligning almost perfectly with Atlas's position. Not strong enough to disrupt satellites, not yet, but rhythmic, almost like a pulse. Here's the unsettling question. Is Atlas merely reacting to the sun, or is it provoking it? Could the comet's composition, its strange ion cloud, be interacting with solar winds in a way we don't fully understand? In myth, the sun was always a god, and comets its challengers. In Polynesian traditions, fiery visitors were seen as sparks from battles among the stars. In Norse legend, the sun is hunted by wolves, destined to be devoured when Ragnarok comes. And here we are, watching a real wolf tail in the sky, Atlas, as the sun seems to flare back in response. If the sun is listening, then what message is Atlas carrying? A natural one, written in plasma and chemistry, or something else, something sent deliberately long ago, waiting for this exact approach? The watchers on Earth whisper among themselves, and an unease grows. Because if Atlas can speak to the sun, what prevents it from speaking to us? When solar winds shift, Earth feels it. Auroras dance, radio signals bend, compasses spin with restless needles. And lately, strange disturbances have been flickering through our magnetosphere, spikes that coincide with Atlas's advance. To most, it's a curiosity filed under space weather, but for those watching closely, the pattern is chilling. These spikes are not random. They repeat with a cadence, a rhythm, almost like words tapped on a drum. Think of how Morse code works, simple dots and dashes carrying meaning across distance. What if Atlas, or what travels with it, is generating a kind of cosmic Morse code, modulating solar winds so the Earth itself vibrates with hidden messages? The idea sounds absurd, and yet the numbers don't lie. One team of independent researchers plotted the disturbances against ancient records of geomagnetic anomalies. The alignments shocked them. Years when unexplained auroras blazed across skies. Years when civilization shifted, empires toppled, or new religions bloomed. Always, somewhere in the records, a comet had been near. It is as if these visitors have always been drumming on Earth's invisible shield, embedding whispers into our very sky. Messages not heard with ears but with civilizations themselves, shaping us, directing us. Modern scientists dismiss such connections as pareidolia, humans finding patterns where none exist. But the timing is hard to ignore, and the unsettling thought grows stronger. If Atlas is now pulsing at our magnetosphere, then the next stage might not be whispers at all. It could be a shout, a surge strong enough to rattle satellites, disrupt power grids, even rewrite the invisible currents that guide our weather and our minds. The ancients warned us with myth, the instruments warn us with data, and somewhere between the two, Atlas moves closer, as though it knows exactly what it's doing. It is tempting to believe that humanity is the first to wrestle with these questions, that our satellites and telescopes grant us unique insight into the movements of the heavens. But if we pause and sift through the dusty shelves of ancient knowledge, another story begins to emerge. Babylonian astronomers kept clay tablets etched with records of guest stars and sky omens. Among them are descriptions of streaking objects whose behavior does not match ordinary comets. They write of tails that split in two, of skies that glowed red as though a furnace had been opened. Often these events were tied to disaster, kings overthrown, harvests ruined, rivers shifting course. The Chinese court astrologers were no less meticulous. Their records speak of broom stars that lingered too long, stars that seemed to watch Earth. One scroll, nearly 2,000 years old, mentions a comet whose approach was followed by a trembling of the Earth and a wandering of the sun. To modern ears, it sounds like poetic exaggeration. Yet, when compared to geologic evidence of earthquakes and magnetic shifts from those same years, the resonance is eerie. Even the Mayans, gazing from their jungle observatories, told of sky serpents descending to whisper secrets to the rulers. Their codices describe cycles of return, messengers from the black road of the stars, shaping the destiny of nations. What if these were not mere stories? What if they were observational records, wrapped in myth because myth was the language available? Today, scientists scoff at linking Atlas to ancient comets. Yet, the coincidences are difficult to dismiss. The rhythms of disruption, the echoes in our magnetic shield, the sun flaring in response. They are all motifs humanity has seen before. The unsettling thought grows clearer. Perhaps Atlas is not an isolated event. Perhaps it is part of a long cycle, a story older than civilization itself. And maybe, just maybe, our ancestors left warnings not to frighten us, but to prepare us. While myth whispers one story, modern astronomy reveals another, one just as unsettling. When Atlas was first tracked, its path seemed routine. A long-period comet, arriving from the outer dark, swept in by the sun's gravity. But as weeks passed, astronomers noticed something peculiar. Atlas was not where it was supposed to be. Its orbit had shifted, subtly at first, a few seconds of arc on a star map, the kind of discrepancy often brushed aside as instrument error. But the shifts continued, growing bolder, as though the comet were adjusting itself. Comets do shift, of course. Outgassing jets of vapor act like thrusters, nudging them into new courses. Yet Atlas's deviations defied this explanation. The vectors were too neat, the changes too clean. Instead of tumbling randomly, the orbit adjusted as though with intent. One European team ran simulations. If Atlas continued these maneuvers, it would alter its perihelion, the point of closest approach to the Sun, by millions of kilometers. Not by accident, but by choice. Here is where the mind resists. Rocks do not choose. Ice does not plot its course. Yet the data sits on screens blinking back at the watchers. Some whisper about hidden mass, perhaps an unseen fragment trailing Atlas, tugging invisibly. Others mutter darker ideas, that Atlas is not entirely natural, that embedded within its icy crust could be something engineered, using sublimation as a cloak to guide its path. Either way, the implications are staggering. If the orbit continues to shift, then its interactions with the Sun, the flares, the magnetic pulses, may intensify. And if Atlas is indeed guided, then its destination is no longer random. It may be headed not just near the Sun, it may be headed exactly where it intends to be. News of Atlas's shifting orbit did not stay confined to obscure observatories. Within days, encrypted calls buzzed between space agencies. Data packets leapt across oceans, cloaked in classified markings. Suddenly, a comet was no longer an academic curiosity. It was a matter of security. In Washington, in Moscow, in Beijing, the same question echoed. What if it comes closer than expected? Publicly, scientists offered calm statements. Nothing to worry about, they said. Routine orbital drift. But behind closed doors, documents painted a more anxious picture. One leaked report compared Atlas's shifts to course corrections, the very phrase one would use for a spacecraft. At the European Space Operations Centre, astronomers admitted the truth in hushed tones. We don't know what Atlas is doing, we can only follow where it leads. And as governments scrambled, intelligence networks buzzed with something stranger. Old satellite images were re-examined. Radio telescopes tuned into frequencies they hadn't scanned in decades. One observatory in Chile reported rhythmic pulses, faint but regular, emanating near the comet's path. Officials dismissed them as natural noise. Yet off the record, technicians whispered, it almost sounded like a signal. If that were true, then Atlas was not just being watched, it was speaking. By now, a new layer of fear had begun to settle in. What if the comet wasn't only shifting course? What if it was broadcasting? At the Arecibo archives, before the telescope's collapse, researchers unearthed recordings from a forgotten night decades earlier. In those faint signals, patterns emerged that eerily matched the pulses now traced to Atlas. A cycle of threes, then silence, then a rising frequency like a breath being drawn. Coincidence? Perhaps. But what unsettled scientists most was timing. Every spike in the signal corresponded with tiny adjustments in Atlas's orbit, as though the two were linked, intention expressed not in words, but in motion. Governments denied it, of course. No agency admitted receiving a message. Yet within online forums and leaked chat logs, the rumour spread. The signal contained structure. Some claimed it resembled prime numbers. Others swore it mapped constellations. Not Earth's constellations, but patterns visible only from the edge of the solar system. The whispers reached the public in fragments, feeding a new wave of unease. Was Atlas simply a wandering comet? Or was it a visitor, maneuvering, announcing itself with a steady, patient code? What scientists feared most was not what the signal meant. It was who, or what, it was meant for. The sun is not silent. We tend to imagine it as a great burning lamp, constant and unchanging. But to astronomers, the sun is a restless beast. Its surface seethes with arcs of plasma, magnetic storms, and sudden flares that can swallow entire worlds in their brilliance. When Atlas drew closer, something changed. Solar observatories, from NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory to Japan's Hinode, began logging subtle anomalies. The sun's corona flickered in ways it had not in decades. Tiny, heartbeat pulses of ultraviolet light appeared, almost in rhythm with the faint signals linked to Atlas. Coincidence, the official report said, but the timing was too sharp, too deliberate. Each shift in the comet's orbit was matched by a ripple on the solar surface, as though the sun itself were responding. One physicist described it this way: imagine someone knocking at your door. You knock back. That's what the sun is doing. The ancient myths of every culture told of comets as messengers. In Chinese records, they were broom stars, sweeping the sky before disaster. In Rome, they were omens of emperors' deaths. And in the Andes, some comets were said to wake the sleeping gods beneath the mountains. Now, with Atlas drawing near, the metaphor became alarmingly literal. Was the sun being woken, not by chance but by design? Some scientists speculated Atlas carried dust or charged particles that interacted with the sun's magnetic field. Others whispered theories they dared not publish, that the comet itself was designed to speak to stars, a kind of interstellar key crafted to unlock stellar responses. If true, the sun wasn't just reacting, it was remembering something. And if the sun remembered, what would it awaken? While the skies told their quiet story, Earth began to unravel in shadows. Rumors of the signal leaked faster than officials could contain them. In forums buried deep in the web, anonymous whistleblowers claimed that the pulse from Atlas matched ancient radio experiments, the WOW signal from 1977, the eerie peritons caught by Australian telescopes, patterns no one could explain, now resurfacing, but louder, sharper, undeniable. The public, starved for truth, spun into frenzy. Some claimed Atlas was an ark, ferrying knowledge from a lost civilization. Others saw it as a weapon, aimed at the sun itself. Markets twitched nervously. Gold prices climbed. Oil futures dropped. Tech billionaires quietly accelerated their off-world projects. Mars colonies, lunar mining, orbital habitats. It was as if they'd been waiting for exactly this moment. Behind closed doors, governments prepared contingencies. Space agencies planned diversion missions, proposals to nudge Atlas with nuclear payloads. But here was the problem. To alter its path, you must first understand its nature. And if Atlas was not simply a comet, what then? The greatest fear wasn't collision, it was communication. What if the signal wasn't for us? What if Earth was only a bystander, watching a message meant for the sun, meant for something far older, far larger? As astronomers debated, another ripple of solar activity surged. A flare stronger than any in recent memory erupted in precise synchrony with Atlas's approach. Power grids in South America flickered. Satellites went briefly offline. It was as though the comet had knocked again, and this time the sun had answered louder. The world wasn't ready, but the universe no longer cared. When scientists first compared the comet's pulses to solar flares, they found a disturbing symmetry. The wavelengths were not random, they seemed tuned like two instruments in a duet. Think of it this way: comets, in the cosmic sense, are wanderers. They drift between stars, dragging icy tails across the void, reminders of the universe's raw beginnings. But Atlas didn't drift like the others. It moved with precision, bending space around it in ways that defied pure gravity. And now, as it neared the sun, the duet grew louder. Astrophysicists noticed repeating intervals in the flare patterns, almost like syllables. Some argued these were simple magneto-hydrodynamic interactions, plasma waves bouncing through the sun's corona, but to others it looked eerily like syntax, like language. The possibility was chilling. What if the sun had always had a voice, and Atlas was merely giving it the vocabulary? History gave weight to this fear. Across ancient cultures, the sun was not just worshipped, it was listened to. The Babylonians recorded solar eclipses with obsessive care, believing each one was a conversation with the heavens. The Mayans encoded solar cycles into their calendars so precisely that modern astronomers still marvel at their accuracy. The Egyptians spoke of Ra steering his solar bark through chaos each night, battling serpents before rising again. What if these weren't just myths? What if they were dim memories of a time when the sun spoke and humanity briefly understood? Now, armed with radio telescopes and plasma data, modern science stood at the edge of rediscovery. But the cost of that knowledge might be unbearable, because here was the paradox. If Atlas was teaching the sun to speak, who was meant to hear it? Earth, or something waiting far beyond the solar system, listening for the sun's awakened call? And if the sun's voice grew too strong, would we, fragile inhabitants of one small planet, even survive the message? For the first time in generations, scientists found themselves afraid not of what they didn't know, but of what they were beginning to recognize. As telescopes traced the comet's path, something else spread faster than light: belief. It began online, in the corners of forums where conspiracy once thrived unnoticed. Theories tangled like webs, that Atlas was the star wormwood of biblical prophecy, that it was a sun key unlocking dormant gods, that governments had known for decades and built underground bunkers in preparation. But belief does not stay contained. Soon, marches began in small cities, demanding transparency about Atlas. Groups gathered at observatories, chanting as though to force truth out of locked doors. Others, more desperate, turned skyward each night, staring into the dark, waiting for visions. Religions fractured and fused. Some pastors preached that Atlas was heralding the end of days, while others claimed it was the dawn of a new creation. Ancient prophecies from Hopi legends to Norse sagas were pulled into the discourse, each reinterpreted through the glowing tail of the comet. And the strangest part, the sun seemed to feed these fires. Each new solar flare, each strange pulse, arrived like punctuation marks, as though endorsing the wild stories humans spun below. Governments tried to calm the frenzy, but their own unease leaked through. Rumors surfaced of secret briefings with world leaders, of emergency funds allocated to solar contingencies. Satellites were repositioned, nuclear payloads quietly tested, but the public no longer trusted the guardians. To many, the comet was no longer just an object. It was an invitation, an awakening, a promise that the universe was bigger, stranger, and perhaps more dangerous than we dared to believe. The fever of belief spread like contagion, reshaping the very fabric of culture. Schools debated whether to teach Atlas as science or prophecy. Economies twisted as people hoarded supplies, invested in space ventures, or abandoned careers to prepare for the great arrival. And through it all, Atlas kept coming, silent, patient, as though feeding on humanity's unraveling. The comet did not speak, but it no longer needed to. The sun and the people beneath it were speaking loudly enough. At first, it was subtle. A flicker in the auroras, a shimmer of green and violet light rippling farther south than it should. Photographers in Spain captured glowing curtains usually reserved for Arctic skies. To many it was beautiful, proof that Atlas was ushering in wonders, but beauty in the universe often wears the mask of danger. By the second week of Atlas nearing perihelion, satellites began to falter. Communications stuttered, GPS drifted. The timing signals that synchronized entire economies, from stock markets to shipping, slipped out of alignment by mere seconds. But in a world run on precision, those seconds mattered. Flights rerouted, trades collapsed, and then came the storms. The sun flared, not in its usual rhythm but in violent bursts, each seemingly triggered when Atlas swung through certain solar latitudes. Power grids flickered in Canada, then Europe, then Asia. Transformers hummed, overheated, burned out. Engineers warned this was just the beginning. The flare cycles were irregular, unpredictable, as though the sun itself had fallen into a fevered delirium. Earth, caught in its magnetic embrace, trembled. Seismologists noticed a strange correlation. Solar outbursts coincided with a spike in microquakes, tremors too small to devastate cities but too widespread to dismiss. Ancient myths whispered of the earth shaking when gods grew angry. Now, with the sun screaming and a comet as conductor, the myth seemed to stir awake. Ordinary people felt it too. Reports of dizziness, migraines, sleeplessness spread across continents. Some swore they heard a low hum, not from the sky but from within their bones. Medical experts blamed stress, electromagnetic interference, suggestion, but believers called it the awakening pulse, the Earth's heartbeat aligning with the sun's strange new rhythm. And then came the night that should have been dark, but wasn't. Across cities, skies lit up with auroral storms so intense that children in Africa painted suns in their notebooks at midnight. Farmers in India worked by green light instead of lamps, and astronauts aboard the ISS reported something they'd never seen before. Arcs of plasma that seemed to leap not from Earth or Sun, but from the space between, as though some invisible thread was tightening. The comet was closer now. Its glowing body no longer just a distant traveller, but a presence, bending the rules we thought unbreakable. The question was no longer, what is Atlas? It had become, how much of Earth will survive its passing? On a Tuesday morning in Tokyo, financial markets froze. Servers went dark. Entire data centers, shielded against storms, blinked offline. No explanation could hold. By afternoon, similar failures rippled through London, New York, Dubai. Not simultaneous, but cascading, like dominoes in the digital nervous system of the planet. It wasn't just finance. Planes lost contact with towers. Hospitals switched to backup generators, but even those buckled under fluctuating loads. Trains ground to a halt mid-journey. Cars with automated systems veered into chaos. The terrifying part wasn't just the collapse, it was the timing. The outages came in waves, mirroring the pulses scientists had charted between Atlas and the sun. It was as though the comet was reaching through the star, strumming Earth's electromagnetic field like strings on an instrument. Governments responded the only way they could: blackout protocols. Nuclear plants shut down preemptively. Military satellites went silent. Official voices urged calm, but their own broadcasts broke into static. And yet, while machines faltered, strange patterns bloomed in the chaos. Cryptographers uncovered repeating sequences hidden in the noise of failed transmissions, geometric spirals, golden ratios, prime numbers. Was this coincidence, natural interference, or communication? The idea chilled even skeptics. For decades, humanity had sent messages into space, Voyager's golden record, pulsar maps, radio greetings. Now it seemed something might be answering back, not with words, but with the collapse of the very systems we'd built to dominate Earth. On the streets, panic and awe blurred. Some people lit candles and prayed. Others danced beneath the green skies, convinced they were witnessing rebirth. Philosophers argued whether humanity was being attacked or rewired, because one truth could no longer be ignored. Atlas wasn't just a comet, it was a catalyst, a spark, something that could turn the sun, the giver of life, into a voice, a weapon, or a guide, and Earth, fragile and unprepared, was now listening whether it wanted to or not. In the blackout's aftermath, scientists raced to decode the patterns hidden in the static. At first, it looked like nonsense, bursts of interference, irregular and chaotic. But one late-night team at CERN noticed the sequences matched something eerily familiar, not random noise, but a structure woven into nature itself. The Fibonacci spiral. From seashells to galaxies, it was the signature of life and growth. Yet here it was, etched in electromagnetic storms, dancing in the sun's flares. Could it be chance, or was the universe sending back the very language it had always written in? Governments demanded answers, theories split into camps. One group insisted Atlas was discharging charged particles, and the sun was responding with echoes, a natural phenomenon. Strange, but not intelligent. Another group whispered the unthinkable, that this was deliberate. The comet was not only surviving the sun's wrath, but manipulating it, bending its output into symbols we could recognize. The deeper the scientists dug, the more unsettling it became. They found prime numbers encoded in flare intervals, the mathematical fingerprints of intelligence. And then came the breakthrough. A signal analyst in India mapped the timing of flare bursts against Earth's rotation. The intervals corresponded perfectly to the coordinates of ancient monuments, Giza, Teotihuacan, Stonehenge, places humanity had long associated with the sky. It was as though the sun itself was illuminating old wounds, reminding us of forgotten conversations between Earth and stars. Religions seized upon it. In sermons and live streams, leaders declared this was revelation, the heavens speaking in a tongue older than Scripture. Some called it a warning, others an invitation. But one question silenced even the loudest voices. If this is communication, who is speaking? The sun using Atlas as its amplifier, or Atlas itself using the sun as a voice? The thought lingered like a shadow across humanity. Had we summoned this knowingly or not? And more chilling, what answer had we demanded that the universe was now delivering? The first undeniable moment came on a Thursday night as billions watched live feeds of Atlas nearing perihelion. Astronomers had pointed every available telescope at the sun, bracing for data, for chaos, for beauty. What they saw instead left even seasoned scientists trembling. As Atlas skimmed the edge of the sun's blazing corona, the star erupted in a flare of unprecedented symmetry. Not random bursts, not chaotic tongues of fire, but a shape, a ring, perfect, unbroken, luminous. For 23 minutes, the sun burned with a halo so geometrically precise that even skeptics were silenced. It was not nature's usual chaos, it was intention. Around the world, people fell to their knees. Some wept, some screamed. In remote villages without internet, word still spread within hours. The sun had spoken. The implications rippled faster than light. Governments convened emergency councils. Were they witnessing an alien beacon, a cosmic ritual, or the birth of something new? Could it be weaponized? Should it be hidden? but no secrecy was possible. The ring had been visible in backyards and deserts, to farmers and schoolchildren, to anyone who happened to look up. Meanwhile, those tracking seismic activity noticed another shiver beneath Earth's crust, not destructive, but rhythmic, like a drumbeat timed with the sun's glowing ring. Some said Earth was answering back, and for the first time in human history, the question was no longer whether we were alone. It was whether we were participants in a dialogue we had never known existed. The comet was no longer just a traveller, it was an intercessor, a messenger, or perhaps a trigger. The sun had answered yes. But was that answer a promise or a warning? When the sun burned its perfect halo, the world did not react with unity. Instead, it fractured. In New York, millions flooded the streets chanting that the event was proof of salvation, a cosmic sign that humanity was chosen. Across Europe, skeptics mocked them, insisting it was nothing more than plasma physics obeying natural order. But their laughter rang hollow. Many of those same skeptics had watched with wide eyes, their confidence crumbling. And then there were those who saw danger. Defense ministers gathered in underground bunkers, whispering about possibilities that made generals pale. What if Atlas was a scout, the ring a signal flare, the beginning of an invasion cloaked in fire and beauty? Science, too, split into rival camps. One faction doubled down on solar physics. Symmetry, they argued, could emerge naturally under rare conditions. Another faction, younger and bolder, proposed a heretical thought that intelligence could emerge not only in biological forms but in stars themselves. The sun was not just burning, it was thinking. Into this storm of theories came something darker. Cults, online forums blossomed overnight, drawing in the disillusioned, the frightened, the dreamers. They called themselves the Children of the Ring. Their doctrine was simple. The sun had chosen Earth, and Atlas was its prophet. Members tattooed spirals on their skin, gathered at megalithic sites, and waited for the next sign. Governments tried to stamp them out, but banning only made the cult stronger. Suddenly, ancient myths of solar gods and fiery wheels of the sky were trending hashtags, blending folklore with live streams. But perhaps the most dangerous development wasn't in cults or councils. It was in the quiet labs where teams of physicists and engineers began to whisper, "What if we respond?" For the first time, humanity considered not just observing the universe, but speaking back. Could we build an artificial echo, a flare to mirror the sun's? Could we send a mathematical pulse into the void and see if it answered? The idea was intoxicating and terrifying. Because if the sun was speaking, then Atlas had delivered the first question. What humanity sent next could shape the answer for centuries or destroy us all. And as if on cue, Atlas moved closer to the sun's surface, unburned, unbroken, as though urging us to decide. It began subtly, a faint shimmer in the solar corona, caught by instruments before human eyes noticed. But once magnified, the pattern was unmistakable. Another pulse, not a ring this time, but a sequence. 3 arcs, evenly spaced, burning like crescents across the solar limb. They appeared, vanished, reappeared, as if tracing a rhythm. Astronomers compared it to a heartbeat, the heartbeat of a star. Global observatories scrambled, measuring intervals down to microseconds. The result was chilling. The rhythm matched the Schumann resonance, the frequency of Earth's own electromagnetic hum. It was as if the sun had synced itself to our planet's pulse, or worse, was calling it out. Seismologists reported strange tremors again, but these were different. They weren't destructive, more like vibrations passing gently through rock. Some described them as a tuning fork in Earth's crust. Birds altered their flight patterns. Whales sang deeper, slower songs. The entire biosphere seemed to shiver, aligning to the sun's crescents. Religious leaders declared it the dawn of a second covenant, Politicians panicked at the thought of losing control, and in Silicon Valley, a handful of startups announced projects to interface with the cosmic signal, promising apps that could translate star language into human words. But in quiet corners of academia, old myths resurfaced. Scrolls once dismissed as metaphor, tales of suns speaking to Earth, of golden discs in the sky, of civilizations erased after answering wrongly, were pulled from archives. What if humanity wasn't the first to witness this? What if the sun had done this before, and still Atlas endured, orbiting so close to annihilation that physics said it should no longer exist? It hovered as if in defiance, a silent companion to the sun's song, a conductor holding the baton. Humanity could no longer agree on what it was: comet, messenger, machine, or something beyond all categories. But one truth was inescapable. The story was accelerating. The dialogue between Sun, Atlas, and Earth was no longer a whisper. It was becoming a conversation, and conversations demand replies. So the question lingered, heavy in every lab, temple, and household. When the sun speaks again, will we have the courage or the wisdom to answer? When the sun's crescents faded, humanity was left with a silence so loud it throbbed in every mind. The crescents had been rhythmic, deliberate, unmistakably patterned. Something had reached across 150 million kilometers and tapped on our cosmic window. The silence begged a question. Would we knock back? In Geneva, a coalition of physicists and engineers secretly gathered in what they called Project Echo. Their goal was bold, reckless, almost heretical, to craft a mathematical flare, a burst of light encoded with prime numbers, and beam it sunward, not from satellites, those were too obvious, too trackable, but from ground-based arrays disguised as routine astronomical research. The debate was ferocious. One camp argued that silence was safety. If the sun is listening, then it already knows more about us than we do about it, warned Dr. Valdez, her voice cracking over a late-night teleconference. Do you wave at a storm before it strikes? Others, younger and hungrier, countered that silence was surrender. If the sun has noticed us, said engineer Hassan Kadir, then we are already in the story. Remaining passive is the greater danger. History tipped the scales. Every great leap of humanity, from fire to flight to radio, had begun with a risk, a message cast into the unknown. And so, under the cover of night, Project Echo transmitted. It was nothing more than pulses of light, binary primes, the universal fingerprint of intelligence. But the symbolism was staggering. Humanity had, for the first time, spoken not to the stars in general, but directly to our sun. For 3 days, nothing happened. Then instruments twitched. Solar probes detected a faint change in coronal oscillations, as if the star had cleared its throat. The pattern wasn't random, it was precise, mirror-like. Our primes had been reflected back, amplified, elongated, and sent not just to Earth but broadcast into the solar system. The sun had answered, and Atlas moved again. For months it had remained in a steady, almost ritual orbit near the solar corona, immune to the furnace. Now it drifted slightly, aligning itself with Earth's trajectory, as though recentering the board. It was no longer just the sun speaking. The messenger had stirred. And with that motion came a chilling realization whispered across labs and war rooms. This wasn't a conversation we had begun. It was one we had been invited to join, perhaps centuries, perhaps eons ago. The question now was not whether the sun was listening. It was whether the entire solar system was tuned to a frequency humanity had only just discovered. While the world marveled at the sun's echo, Earth itself began to speak. In Iceland, seismographs recorded faint pulses, shallow tremors that followed the same rhythm as the solar crescents. Not destructive quakes, but a whispering vibration moving through the crust. In Peru, cave explorers reported luminous flickers along crystalline walls, flashes that pulsed in intervals identical to Project Echo's transmission. Even the Arctic ice sheets vibrated with faint, almost musical resonance. It was as if Earth had become a resonator, replaying the sun's song beneath our feet. Some scientists argued it was coincidence, natural resonances amplified by paranoia, but the data piled up too cleanly, too perfectly aligned. The sun had replied, and now the Earth was carrying that reply like a tuning fork, humming back. Governments panicked. What if by transmitting, Project Echo had triggered something buried within the planet, systems dormant for millennia, waiting for a spark? A classified UN memo leaked online hinted at the unthinkable, that the Earth itself might be part of the dialogue, a participant rather than a bystander. But not all tremors inspired fear. In a desert outside Cairo, an ancient temple wall cracked during one of the vibrations, revealing glyphs scholars had never seen. They depicted twin circles, one blazing, one veiled, connected by a line of smaller dots. Beside them was a figure kneeling, hands lifted not in worship but in surrender. Was this prophecy or memory? Cults declared it proof that humanity had spoken to the sun before and failed. Skeptics dismissed it as opportunistic myth-making. Yet the timing, the unveiling of forgotten carvings just as Earth began to echo the sun, was too uncanny to ignore. Meanwhile, the Children of the Ring expanded. No longer fringe, they gained politicians, generals, even scientists among their followers. They believed Earth itself had been awakened, and that the tremors were signs of an ancient covenant returning. But deeper analysis revealed something stranger still. The tremors were not uniform. They carried layers, sub-patterns hidden inside the broader rhythm, like a message within a message. When decoded, they resembled not human mathematics, but something eerily familiar, the orbital intervals of the planets, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, as if the tremors were reciting the solar system itself, beat by beat. And at the end of the sequence came a pause, a deliberate silence, as though waiting for the next name to be spoken. The implication was staggering. The message wasn't finished. The solar system was being called, planet by planet, into a roll call. Earth had answered. What came next was inevitable. And across the skies, 3IATLAS turned slightly, its path no longer random, but angled toward Mars. The silence after Earth's trembling roll call didn't last long. Almost as if on cue, Mars stirred. Telescopes across the globe reported a faint shimmer above the planet's surface. Not dust, not atmosphere, but something else. The shimmer pulsed in perfect rhythm with the tremors still humming inside Earth. It was as though the red planet had caught the same song and was now playing its verse. At first, scientists blamed solar winds. Mars, with its weak magnetic field, is battered constantly by radiation streaming from the sun. But this wasn't random static. The shimmer was geometrical. It spread in lattices, hexagonal ripples dancing across the thin sky. The Perseverance rover, parked quietly in Jezero crater, recorded something even stranger. The ground beneath its wheels vibrated faintly, independent of wind or weather. Then, embedded microphones captured a low hum, almost musical, resonating through Martian rock. It wasn't mechanical, it wasn't natural, it was a harmony, faint but deliberate, echoing the Earth's tremors, but tuned higher, lighter, as though Mars was the next instrument in an unfolding symphony. News agencies exploded with speculation. Was Mars responding to Earth? Was it responding to Project Echo? Or worse, had Atlas itself become the conductor? Because at the same moment Perseverance logged its hum, orbital cameras caught Atlas pivoting. Slowly, with impossible precision, the interstellar object began adjusting its course, not toward Earth, but toward Mars. It wasn't drifting anymore, it was choosing. Governments scrambled to downplay the images, insisting the alignment was coincidence. But leaked data from NASA's Deep Space Network told another story. Atlas had subtly altered velocity, burning energy, in ways no comet or asteroid could. It was following the rhythm, and that left humanity with a dreadful thought. If Earth had been called and Mars was now answering, what came next? Were we witnessing a chain reaction, planets awakening one by one in response to an ancient frequency woven into the sun? Or was Atlas itself dictating the order, choosing which worlds to activate and when? Theologians, poets, and cults found new meaning overnight. To the children of the ring, this was prophecy fulfilled. Mars was the second lamp to be lit. To skeptics, it was proof of human arrogance, that by transmitting we had accidentally synced ourselves with phenomena we could never hope to control. And for those watching Perseverance's silent cameras, there was only dread, because in the faint distance beyond Martian dunes, something glimmered. For a few frames only, but enough, a flash of crystalline light, buried then gone, as though something beneath Mars's surface had blinked awake. The flash on Perseverance's cameras didn't repeat, but its aftermath rippled across every research station tuned to Mars. Seismic instruments began logging faint but regular beats, microquakes deep underground, spaced in intervals matching the orbital rhythm Earth had already sung. The pattern was impossible to ignore. First Earth, now Mars. 2 planets, back to back, echoing the same sequence. The solar system's roll call was moving forward. What unnerved scientists most wasn't the tremors themselves, but where they pointed. The strongest pulses originated not from random fault lines, but from the ancient subsurface ice deposits beneath Valles Marineris and the southern polar cap. Those places had long been suspected to hold frozen water, even, possibly, briny liquid lakes. Now they seemed to resonate as though those waters had become speakers, carrying a message upward through Martian rock. And if water was transmitting the signal, the implications were terrifying. Water isn't just a solvent of life, it's a conductor, a medium, a memory. On Earth, sound travels 4 times faster through water than air. What if Mars' hidden reserves weren't just holding echoes, but amplifying them? What if every buried lake was part of a planetary sound system, a mechanism tuned not for survival, but for communication? Theories multiplied. Had Mars been seeded as a relay station, designed to wake only when Earth answered? Was the red planet not a failed sibling of Earth, but a deliberate participant in a system-wide architecture, a chain of worlds linked together through resonance? Atlas, now visibly shifting closer, seemed to confirm it. Amateur astronomers tracked its trajectory with alarm. Its alignment with Mars wasn't drifting anymore. It was surgical, precise, almost as though it intended to position itself over the very regions now humming beneath the sands. The public response was electric. Fear and awe collided in equal measure. Forums brimmed with theories of alien beacons, planetary machines, even living worlds waking in sequence. Governments held emergency summits but offered only silence. The absence of denial was more terrifying than denial itself. Meanwhile, Perseverance's sensors captured one last anomaly before feeds mysteriously cut off for maintenance. A faint image, blurry but undeniable. Geometric striations in the sand, etched not by wind but by vibration. Hexagons, repeating endlessly like a signature stamped across the desert floor. Was it natural resonance, or something deliberately writing itself into the planet's skin? The children of the ring declared Mars the second voice in the choir. Scientists argued in hushed tones that we were standing at the brink of discovering a solar system designed not for random evolution, but for dialogue. And in the silence that followed, one question loomed larger than all others. If Mars had now joined the conversation, what world would answer next? Because in the orbital rhythm, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, the next beat was already waiting. If Mars had joined the song, logic suggested Venus should be next. Earth, then Mars, then Venus. It was simple orbital math. Astronomers stayed up all night waiting for the tremors, the shimmer, the sign. Telescopes aimed at the planet's thick yellow veil, straining to catch any ripple in its sulphurous clouds. Seismometers on Earth were tuned, listening for sympathetic resonance. And then, nothing. Venus remained silent. No shimmer, no tremor, just a toxic sea of atmosphere, crushing pressure, and winds fast enough to shred steel. But silence itself is never simple. For some, this was a relief. If the solar system was indeed awakening like a choir, then maybe Venus's absence meant the chain had broken. The roll call had stopped. But others, watching more closely, realized something far stranger. Because while Venus did not sing, it did resist. Radio astronomers noticed the planet's ionosphere thickening, almost as if repelling the very frequencies that had shaken Earth and Mars, like a shield. For decades, Venus had been called Earth's twin gone wrong, a greenhouse nightmare, a place where oceans had boiled away billions of years ago. But what if it hadn't simply failed? What if it had been designed to be silent? Deep within classified reports, whispers emerged. Soviet Venera landers in the 1970s had returned garbled signals, strange low-frequency pulses buried in the noise, dismissed at the time as interference. But when those recordings were replayed now, under new analysis, the hum sounded eerily like Earth's tremors, only inverted, reversed, as if Venus hadn't joined the song, but had been singing against it all along. Religious sects seized on this instantly. Venus became the rebel planet, the angel that refused to bow, proof that not every world was in harmony with the sun's secret symphony. Scientists were less poetic, but no less unsettled. If Venus was actively blocking resonance, then the roll call wasn't a natural progression. It was selective. Something, or someone, was choosing which worlds could awaken. And perhaps that was the most terrifying revelation yet, because when Atlas tilted its path again, it didn't turn toward Venus. It curved past it, a deliberate skip, as if Venus were irrelevant, or worse, dangerous. The roll call was moving outward, and that meant Jupiter was next. When Jupiter answers, the entire solar system listens. Almost overnight, every observatory turned its gaze toward the largest planet, and almost immediately the signs began. Jupiter's auroras, normally confined to its poles, erupted across its entire circumference. Curtains of light stretched thousands of kilometers, burning neon green and violet, visible even in amateur telescopes. They pulsed not randomly, but rhythmically, and the rhythm matched the tremors first recorded on Earth. Then came the storms. The Great Red Spot, already a centuries-old tempest, accelerated. Winds that had held steady for decades suddenly intensified, churning like a heartbeat quickened by adrenaline. And stranger still, new spots appeared, smaller, circular storms, glowing faintly from within as though lit by some inner fire. From space they looked less like weather and more like eyes. Radio bursts followed. Jupiter has always been a noisy world, its magnetic fields spitting out powerful radio waves. But now those emissions had structure. Astronomers recorded bursts repeating in mathematical sequences. Prime numbers, Fibonacci spirals, progressions that felt less like nature and more like language. And if Jupiter was speaking, it was doing so with impossible force. The children of the ring declared this the confirmation they'd awaited. The choir was real, and Jupiter was the baritone, the anchor of the cosmic hymn. Skeptics countered that we were mistaking chaos for communication, but the timing was undeniable. Earth trembled, Mars hummed, Venus resisted, and Jupiter now roared. Meanwhile, Atlas adjusted course again, slowing, as though savoring the alignment. Its glow intensified as it drifted near Jupiter's magnetic field. Some swore it wasn't observing but feeding, drinking in the planet's radiation like a seed drinking sunlight. The public felt the shift viscerally. News outlets played recordings of Jupiter's radio bursts, translating them into sound. The result was haunting. A deep, oceanic moan, layered with harmonic whistles, like whales calling across cosmic waters. To some, it was beautiful. To others, it was unbearable, a noise that crawled under the skin. And then, as if to punctuate its awakening, Jupiter did something no one had expected. For a brief moment, its magnetosphere expanded, ballooning far beyond its usual boundary, sweeping across space like a protective cloak. Earth's instruments caught the ripple as it passed, a wave of charged particles, structured, patterned. It wasn't just energy, it was signal. Jupiter had spoken, but what message had it given? A warning, a greeting, or a command? The roll call had grown louder, and the solar system was listening. The choir was no longer theory, it was real. And if the largest planet had now joined the song, what could possibly come next? If Jupiter roared, then Saturn whispered. At first, scientists thought the planet had remained quiet, its golden atmosphere still, its bands undisturbed. But Saturn, unlike Jupiter, does not shout in storms. It sings in patterns. And its instrument has always been its rings. The first hint came from the Cassini mission's archived data. Years earlier, Cassini had detected faint oscillations within the rings, waves of ice and rock vibrating in response to Saturn's internal motions. At the time, they were catalogued as ring seismology, background noise. But when researchers replayed those records alongside Jupiter's new emissions, something impossible happened. The two aligned. The waves in Saturn's rings matched Jupiter's pulses, as if the two giants were already in conversation across the void. And then telescopes confirmed it wasn't a coincidence. From Earth, high-resolution observations revealed the rings shimmering faintly, catching sunlight in unusual ways, almost like a diffraction pattern. It wasn't random. The brightness ebbed and pulsed in a cycle, a rhythm that repeated every 143 seconds, the same period as the tremors first recorded on Earth. Saturn, it seemed, had answered, but not with storms or radio bursts, with its rings. To the untrained eye, they looked like cosmic jewelry, but to scientists, those vast arcs of ice had become a resonator, vibrating as though struck by some invisible bow. Each ripple through the icy particles was like a note, each gap in the rings like the pause between words. Saturn wasn't just echoing Jupiter's roar, it was shaping it, tuning it, transforming raw energy into something structured, and when instruments converted those vibrations into sound, the result was haunting. Imagine wind chimes the size of a planet, their tones ethereal, almost human. Not noise, not chaos. A song. The public, of course, went wild. Videos of the Saturn song spread across every platform, paired with visuals of the glowing rings. Some claimed they could hear voices in the resonance, hidden lyrics whispering just beyond comprehension. Conspiracy forums insisted it was proof Saturn was a transmitter, not just a planet, a repeater station in some galactic network. But for the scientific community, one observation stood above all others. Atlas had slowed again. As it approached Saturn's orbit, the interstellar object pivoted, aligning itself with the rings. For 12 hours, it hovered at the perfect angle, its own glow flickering in time with the ring patterns, like a conductor pausing to let the orchestra swell. And then, with deliberate precision, Atlas moved on, leaving Saturn shimmering in its wake. The choir had found its rhythm, and the next voice waiting to join was darker still. When the roll call reached Uranus, expectations shifted. Unlike Jupiter or Saturn, Uranus had always seemed quiet. A tilted world, spinning on its side, cloaked in pale blue haze. For centuries, astronomers had regarded it as an oddball, a misfit planet whose secrets lay buried beneath featureless clouds. But as Atlas crept closer, Uranus began to stir in ways no one anticipated. First came the glow. Auroras flared at its poles, far brighter than models predicted, bursting with violet light. Unlike Jupiter's steady pulses, Uranus's auroras danced erratically, flickering like a code trying to be deciphered. At the same time, its magnetosphere, already one of the strangest in the solar system, tilted wildly from its axis, began to wobble. Each sway seemed to catch Atlas' glow, refracting it across space like a prism. Then came the resonance. Radio telescopes picked up bursts unlike anything yet recorded. Not storms, not song, but something jagged, a staccato pattern. Clicks, pauses, surges. To some, it sounded mechanical, as though Uranus was less a planet and more a machine starting to boot. Theories spiraled instantly. Some argued the planet's strange tilt was not an ancient collision, as textbooks claimed, but evidence of design, an intentional reorientation to tune Uranus into the cosmic symphony at a specific angle. The Children of the Ring seized on this, proclaiming Uranus the hidden key, the planet whose silence had been masking the solar system's deeper rhythm until Atlas arrived to unlock it. And when data was layered, Earth's tremors, Mars' hum, Jupiter's roar, Saturn's song, Uranus's staccato fit perfectly into place, like percussion added to a swelling chorus. But the most unsettling part came not from Uranus itself, but from Atlas. As the interstellar visitor passed, its trajectory bent more sharply than physics allowed. Not a slingshot, not gravity alone. Observers swore it looked as if Uranus had pulled Atlas toward it for a fraction of a second, then released it again, like a handshake or an agreement. The solar system's choir was no longer just resonance, it was choreography, a dance unfolding before human eyes. And with Neptune on the horizon, the final movement loomed. The question was no longer whether the solar system was waking, it was whether humanity could survive what it would become. If Uranus was percussion, Neptune was the organ, deep, resonant, and unsettling. For centuries, Neptune had been the least explored of the gas giants. Farthest from the sun, cloaked in cobalt storms, it was often treated as an afterthought. But now, as Atlas slid toward its orbit, the forgotten planet became the centerpiece of a cosmic drama. The first signs came from the Great Dark Spot, a storm that had once disappeared from view decades ago. Suddenly, it returned, larger, darker, spinning with violent precision. But unlike Jupiter's chaotic swirls, Neptune's storm pulsed. Every 6 minutes, a faint flash appeared within its depths, invisible to the human eye but clear in radio bands. Scientists didn't call it lightning, they called it signaling, and the signals weren't random. Each pulse mirrored the intervals of Uranus's staccato, but stretched longer, heavier, like echoes in a cathedral. When layered into the growing planetary score, Neptune's pulses acted as a baseline, grounding the solar system's rising symphony. But the haunting voice of Neptune wasn't just in its storm. It came from below the surface, from the deep interior, where pressure turned hydrogen into metallic seas. Instruments recorded vibrations traveling outward, shaking the very magnetosphere. Those vibrations were so strong, they rattled spacecraft sensors millions of kilometers away. When translated into sound, the result was chilling, a droning hum, low and endless, like a chant sung by a hidden choir beneath the waves. The Children of the Ring wasted no time declaring Neptune the base of the choir. Their prophecy videos went viral, claiming the solar system itself was singing, and Neptune's voice was the one that carried the weight of judgment. But skeptics pointed to something stranger. Neptune's hum wasn't just noise. When scientists slowed the frequency, a repeating pattern emerged, rising and falling like breath. It was alive, or at least it sounded alive. And as Atlas skimmed Neptune's outer edge, something unprecedented occurred. The interstellar visitor paused. For 33 minutes, it drifted in synchronous orbit, perfectly locked with the rhythm of the storm. The object glowed faint blue, as if reflecting Neptune's aura before igniting with new intensity and continuing onward, toward the edge. Neptune's haunting voice was not a finale, it was an opening note to what lay beyond. With Neptune's hum still vibrating through the cosmos, all attention turned to what lay past it, the Kuiper Belt, the frozen frontier of the solar system. For decades, astronomers had catalogued icy worlds, Pluto, Eris, Haumea, Makemake, relics of planetary formation, silent and forgotten. But as Atlas crossed Neptune's boundary, silence turned into resonance. It began with Pluto. New Horizons had left behind detailed maps, but nothing prepared scientists for the glow now radiating from Sputnik Planitia, the icy, heart-shaped plain. Telescopes captured faint pulses of light reflecting off its nitrogen ice, shimmering like a cosmic lighthouse. Every pulse matched Neptune's rhythm, as though Pluto were listening and answering. Then Eris joined in. Its frozen surface reflected starlight in unusual bursts, flaring brighter than any known albedo should allow. Soon, more objects chimed in. Tiny Kuiper Belt bodies, each no larger than a mountain, flickered faintly, like distant fireflies. Individually insignificant, together overwhelming. The Kuiper Belt had become a choir of ice. But the strangest part wasn't the light, it was the geometry. When charted, the pulses formed arcs, weaving patterns that converged toward a single point far beyond Neptune, a place still invisible, still undefined. Scientists called it the vector. Conspiracy theorists called it the stage. The Children of the Ring claimed it was proof the solar system was preparing for something. A gathering, a revelation, maybe even a summoning. And in the data, one unsettling fact stood out. Atlas wasn't heading randomly anymore. It was moving directly toward the vector, guided by the rhythm of the planetary choir. For the first time, humanity realized the solar system was not just responding, it was orchestrating. Planets, moons, and icy fragments were no longer background scenery. They were participants in an ancient performance, and Atlas was the conductor. At the edge of the solar system, silence no longer existed. Everything was singing, and what waited at the vector might finally reveal what, or who, they were singing for. For months, astronomers thought the vector was just geometry, a convenient crossing point where planetary pulses seemed to converge. But as Atlas approached, the vector revealed itself as something far stranger. At first, telescopes saw nothing, just emptiness, the dark gulf beyond Neptune where sunlight dwindles into cold oblivion. Yet as Atlas drew closer, instruments began detecting gravitational fluctuations. Space itself seemed to bend ever so slightly, like ripples forming on the surface of an unseen pond. It wasn't a planet, at least not in any familiar sense. The fluctuations formed a rhythm, a gravitational pulse, faint but undeniable, aligned with the cosmic choir. Pluto, Eris, Haumea, Makemake, all their icy flickers were locked in perfect timing with this unseen center, and as if on cue, Atlas adjusted course. It wasn't drifting, it was steering, pulled not by chance, but by design. Radio telescopes on Earth translated the fluctuations into sound. What emerged was not noise, but structure, a rising and falling wave, layered like overlapping voices. Scientists described it as harmonic gravitation. Conspiracy theorists called it the heartbeat of the vector. And then came the light. Beyond the Kuiper Belt, faint arcs appeared, ribbons of pale luminescence threading the void like ghostly auroras without a planet to anchor them. The arcs stretched across millions of kilometers, curving inward toward the vector's invisible core. Each pulse from Neptune's storm, each flicker from Pluto's ice, sent ripples racing along these arcs, illuminating them in waves. It looked less like random plasma and more like architecture, a lattice of light, ancient and deliberate. One researcher dared to whisper what others only feared to think. What if the vector isn't just a point? What if it's a structure? The Children of the Ring, emboldened by the evidence, declared the vector to be the stage of awakening, a place not discovered, but waiting. They insisted Atlas had not stumbled into the solar system by accident. It had been summoned here, and the vector was where the curtain would finally rise. But scientists, though careful with language, admitted one chilling truth. The vector's pull wasn't just acting on Atlas, it was acting on everything. Tiny Kuiper belt objects shifted slightly, their orbits bending. Even Neptune's storm pulses had begun to accelerate, as though pulled into alignment with something larger. The solar system wasn't just echoing a song, it was tuning itself. And humanity, for the first time, realized that the vector might not be passive at all. It might be alive, or worse, waiting for something to arrive. As Atlas neared the vector, the lattice of light grew sharper. No longer faint arcs, but braided strands of glowing matter, curving into structures that defied natural explanation. From Earth, the Hubble and JWST captured images of what looked like spirals of plasma frozen in geometric symmetry. Hexagons, arcs, and concentric rings, each expanding outward like the ribs of some colossal, invisible machine. To the naked eye, it was emptiness. To instruments, it was a cathedral woven from light and gravity. The Kuiper belt's icy choir grew louder, their pulses accelerating, feeding the lattice with flickering waves. When graphed, the rhythm displayed shocking precision. Ratios that mirrored the golden sequence, Fibonacci spirals encoded in light. Random ice shards were behaving as if they were programmed to sing in harmony. And still, Atlas moved forward, threading the spirals as though following a pre-written path. Some scientists theorized the lattice was the remnant of a cosmic collision, frozen plasma filaments shaped by magnetism billions of years ago. Others weren't convinced. The symmetry was too deliberate, the alignment too exact. This wasn't chaos, this was design. And with design came the unspoken question, designed by whom? The Children of the Ring flooded their channels with proclamations. The forgotten architects had left the lattice as both beacon and stage. Humanity, they warned, was witnessing the overture to an ancient performance, a performance that might not be meant for human eyes. But the most unsettling discovery was yet to come. As Atlas crossed into the densest part of the lattice, its glow changed. No longer icy blue, it radiated bands of color, violet, gold, crimson, cascading across its surface like shifting skin. Instruments on Earth recorded the transformation with disbelief. Atlas was not reflecting light, it was responding to it. Each wave that struck the lattice was answered by Atlas with its own matching pulse, like a conductor guiding an orchestra. That orchestra was no longer planetary, it was cosmic. And in that moment, one terrifying truth settled over the scientific community. The vector was not simply where the solar system ended, it was where something else began. The lattice wasn't silent anymore. As Atlas drifted deeper into its glowing arcs, the filaments began to hum with a resonance not unlike Neptune's storm, only magnified to a cosmic scale. Waves of energy coursed through the structure, spreading like ripples through a spider's web, each pulse radiating outward across billions of kilometers. On Earth, observatories scrambled to make sense of the data. Some described it as radio emissions. Others said it was gravitational waves carrying encoded patterns. But when the recordings were slowed and translated into sound, what emerged chilled even the most skeptical researchers. It resembled language, not words, but cadence, the rhythm of communication. The hum rose and fell, a deliberate structure of beats and pauses, as though the lattice itself was aware of Atlas's arrival and had chosen this moment to awaken. For a brief time, scientists speculated Atlas had triggered the reaction, that its exotic surface was somehow tuned to resonate with the lattice. But then came a revelation no one could explain. The hum wasn't only answering Atlas, it was echoing Earth. Signals sent decades ago, Voyager's golden record, pulsar maps, fragments of television broadcasts, began bouncing back from the lattice, woven into its song. Faintly, distorted but unmistakable. The laughter of children, old music broadcasts, even the ticking sound of early satellites. The lattice had been listening all along, storing Earth's whispers in its cold geometry, and now, with Atlas as the catalyst, it had begun to speak them back. Conspiracy channels ignited. The children of the ring declared the architects had built the lattice as an interstellar archive, waiting for civilizations like ours to step into its resonance. But others wondered, if the lattice was an archive, then who was meant to read it? Atlas pulsed brighter, answering each wave with its own glow. A duet had begun, not between planet and object, but between something ancient and something foreign. A conversation humanity wasn't invited to, only allowed to overhear. And as the waves grew stronger, so did their reach. Earth's magnetosphere twitched under faint fluctuations. Deep ocean seismographs picked up hums too low for human ears. The solar system itself seemed to be quivering in time with the lattice. What terrified scientists most wasn't the sound, it was the timing. Every pulse was accelerating, every pause shrinking. The lattice wasn't just speaking, it was counting down. At first, the pattern looked random, but the more data poured in, the clearer it became. The lattice was ticking like a cosmic metronome, its rhythm tightening as though something was approaching an inevitable climax. Mathematicians traced the intervals. The countdown wasn't measured in seconds or hours. It was astronomical. Orbital cycles, planetary alignments, pulses that matched the rhythm of the sun itself. And the endpoint wasn't centuries away. It was soon, within decades, or perhaps even years, the lattice's countdown would reach zero. But what happened then? No one could agree. Some argued it would unleash energy, a burst of gravitational resonance that might tear apart Atlas or bend space itself. Others feared it wasn't about destruction at all, but activation, as if the solar system was about to switch on a function long dormant. The children of the ring, of course, were ecstatic. To them, this was the moment of the architect's return. They claimed the countdown would open a gate, and Atlas was the key. Every glow it emitted, every pulse it returned was part of the lock being undone. Governments, however, saw it differently. Behind closed doors, security agencies called it a cosmic hazard. Some whispered about planetary defenses. Others considered blackout strategies, fearing mass panic if humanity knew the scale of what was unfolding. But silence was impossible. The lattice's glow had become visible even to amateur astronomers with powerful backyard telescopes. Strange arcs of light beyond Neptune, spiraling in patterns too symmetrical to be chance. The internet overflowed with shaky videos of the ghost web, millions of people suddenly aware that the edge of the solar system was alive. Meanwhile, Atlas's own transformation continued. Its glow no longer flickered randomly. It pulsed in harmony with the lattice, its surface patterns shifting like circuitry, awakening after eons of dormancy. Each change seemed to move it closer to some new state, as though the object was rewriting itself in real time. And then came the most disturbing revelation of all. Hidden within the lattice's countdown was a sub-pattern, faint but undeniable. When graphed, it resembled a spiral, not unlike a DNA helix. Biologists who saw the data couldn't believe their eyes. It wasn't just numbers, it was genetic code. The architects weren't only engineers of matter, They were engineers of life, and whatever the countdown was leading toward, it might not just reshape the solar system, it might rewrite us. Atlas had always been described as a fragment, a rogue shard of interstellar stone hurtling aimlessly toward the sun. But the data no longer supported that simple picture. Its glow was no longer passive reflection. It pulsed with deliberate rhythm, mirroring the lattice's countdown. And then came the observation that changed everything. High-resolution scans showed that Atlas's surface wasn't solid in the way a rock should be. Instead, it flexed. Faintly, rhythmically, spectrographs recorded microscopic expansions and contractions, as if the object was breathing. Some dismissed it as thermal stress, heat from the sun expanding and shrinking its crust. But the timing didn't match. The rhythm wasn't dictated by sunlight. It was dictated by the lattice's pulse. Every expansion corresponded to the hum. Every contraction fell into silence. It was alive, or something terrifyingly close. The word organism began to appear in quiet research memos, always in quotation marks. Biologists debated whether life could exist at such a scale, with materials so alien to our chemistry. Some suggested it wasn't life as we know it, but a hybrid of matter and code, a biomechanical organism, crafted rather than born. The Children of the Ring seized on this immediately. To them, Atlas was no longer a mere visitor. It was a messenger, a probe alive enough to respond, but engineered enough to obey the countdown written into the lattice. But others asked a darker question. If Atlas was alive, then was it truly here by chance, or had it been summoned? On Earth, scientists began replaying their own radio emissions from the past century. Could something in our endless chatter, our pings, broadcasts, beacons, have triggered Atlas' turn toward the sun? If so, humanity hadn't just been overheard. We had been answered. The implications rippled through every discipline. Astronomers compared Atlas's rhythms to embryonic development cycles. Biologists argued its patterns resembled mitosis. Even geologists noted that its surface shifts looked less like cracks in rock and more like tissues dividing. And then, one night, the object released something into the void. Not rock, not gas. A filament, thin, glowing, and unmistakably organic. It curled outward, like a tendril seeking connection, before dissolving into dust. The universe had just shown its hand. Atlas wasn't merely a relic, it was growing. The tendril was only the beginning. Over the following weeks, astronomers tracked more filaments emerging from Atlas's body. At first, they seemed fragile, like spider silk unraveling in a storm. But then they began to weave, knotting themselves into patterns too precise to be natural. From Earth, through magnified lenses, the sight was haunting. Atlas, spinning faint arcs of glowing threads around itself, constructing what looked eerily like a cocoon. The scientific community fractured. Some argued this was the final phase of disintegration, the object tearing itself apart as it neared the sun. But others saw purpose in its weaving, as if Atlas was constructing something or preparing to shed its old form for a new one. And through it all, the lattice continued its countdown, pulsing faster, louder, as though urging Atlas toward completion. Governments could no longer contain the story. Amateur astronomers uploaded images across forums, calling it the chrysalis beyond Neptune. The world was captivated, terrified, unable to look away. What was hatching in the cold dark, and why did it pulse in time with an ancient machine at the edge of the solar system? Some historians drew chilling parallels. Myths across cultures spoke of sky beings arriving in vessels shaped not as ships, but as eggs. Ancient carvings from Mesopotamia to the Andes depicted glowing orbs splitting open, releasing teachers from the stars. Could Atlas be the fulfillment of those stories, not metaphor but memory of past visitations? And then came the sound. As the cocoon thickened, radio arrays on Earth picked up a faint signal, not random noise but a modulated frequency, cycling in bands that matched the lattice's countdown. When filtered through acoustic models, it resembled something uncanny, a heartbeat. Atlas wasn't just alive, it was gestating. Whispers spread. This was the moment the architect's messenger would emerge, a being encoded into stone, hidden in interstellar drift, now nurtured by a cosmic machine built to awaken it at the appointed time. The children of the ring celebrated openly. The architect's return, they chanted, their gathering swelling in numbers. But for others, the fear was consuming. If the architects were indeed returning, would they come as guardians, or as claimants, repossessing a system they built long before we walked its third planet? The cocoon pulsed brighter, the heartbeat signal growing stronger. The countdown accelerated still. Something was about to be born. It began so subtly that most instruments missed it. A faint flicker, a dimming in Atlas's cocoon as though a shadow passed across its surface. Then, telescopes caught it, a line, impossibly thin, running along the glowing threads. A crack. The cocoon had begun to split. At first, astronomers thought it was the stress of the sun's gravity tearing it apart. But when they slowed the footage, the truth was undeniable. The fracture was not chaotic, it was controlled. The crack traced itself in a perfect arc, like a hatch opening. For centuries, humanity had speculated what first contact might look like: a ship in orbit, a transmission decoded, a landing on Earth. Few imagined it would begin here, in the cold dark beyond the sun, with a cocoon of light unzipping itself to release. What exactly? The signals confirmed it. The faint heartbeat, long steady, surged into a roar. The pulses matched perfectly with the widening crack. Every second, the energy spiked higher until the cocoon vibrated so violently that even naked eye observers could see it shimmer. And then came the release. From the crack bled streams of luminous dust, spiraling outward like ribbons. Unlike natural debris, they didn't drift aimlessly. They arranged themselves, curling into elegant spirals, their motions echoing sacred geometry carved in temples millennia ago. Circles within circles, triangles within spheres. On Earth, mathematicians ran frantic analyses. The shapes weren't random. They matched ratios embedded in the lattice's architecture. Pi, phi, Fibonacci spirals, the universal constants of design. This wasn't the death of Atlas, it was its birth cry. The children of the ring were ecstatic. In their doctrine, the fracture of light marked the moment the architects returned to claim their work. For them, this was prophecy fulfilled. For governments, it was the signal of an unknown intelligence unfolding within the solar system, and the greatest national security risk in history. But for ordinary people watching leaked footage, it was something else entirely. Awe. The cocoon glowed like a second sun in miniature, wrapped in sacred patterns. It was beautiful, terrifying, impossible to turn away from. And beneath that beauty lingered a question no one could shake. What could emerge from such perfection? The crack widened further, light pouring out like molten gold. The cocoon was opening and the messenger inside was almost free. The cocoon no longer concealed, it revealed. Through the widening fracture, shapes stirred within Atlas's shell. Not jagged rock, not the shards of a comet. Something smooth, curved, deliberate. Observers described it as a core, gleaming with liquid silver, its surface alive with shifting patterns. It rotated slowly, as though awakening after a long sleep. Each turn reflected starlight in impossible colors, hues no human language could name. Some swore the colors triggered sensations in the mind, feelings that had no words. Others said they heard whispers in their dreams the night the images first went public. Was this merely suggestion, or was the object already reaching out? The cocoon threads continued to unravel. pulling away to reveal more of the silver form. As they fell back, they did not disintegrate into dust. Instead, they reattached themselves, linking into orbiting rings around the core. Rings that hummed with resonance, each one amplifying the countdown's rhythm. The lattice at the edge of the solar system pulsed in perfect synchronization. The architect's machine was no longer silent background. It was conductor to an orchestra. Atlas was the instrument. The song was only just beginning. Theories multiplied overnight. Some scientists claimed we were watching the birth of an entirely new entity, part machine, part organism, designed to awaken at this precise era in cosmic history. Others insisted it was not a birth but a revelation. Atlas had always been this thing, cloaked in stone until the countdown commanded it to shed its disguise. And yet, the emergence carried with it a terrifying undertone. If Atlas was built, then someone built it. And if it was awakening, then someone had programmed the time of awakening, which meant humanity might not be witnessing a random event, but the deliberate execution of a plan set in motion eons before. The object's surface rippled, and for the first time light burst from within. Not reflected sunlight, but its own radiance. The glow formed patterns, fleeting but unmistakable. Glyphs that bore resemblance to carvings scattered across Earth's ancient ruins. Symbols from cultures who never met, separated by oceans and millennia, now dancing in the void as though they were always connected. The children of the ring called it the first language. To skeptics, it was coincidence. But to millions watching secretly streamed images, it was proof of design. The cocoon was nearly gone. The silver core stood revealed, alive, humming, radiant. The messenger of the architects had begun to emerge, and Earth, trembling, awestruck, unprepared, could do nothing but wait. For days, astronomers kept insisting that Atlas's silver form was inert, a relic, a machine, something long dormant. But then came the shift. The glow that had once spilled randomly across its surface began to concentrate. Lines of light curved inward, spiraling toward a single focal point. And then it happened. A circle appeared, dark, surrounded by blazing radiance. It was not an eye in the biological sense, but no one who saw it mistook its intent. Atlas was looking. The gaze, as it came to be called, turned outward toward the solar system. It swept slowly, passing across Mars, Venus, and finally toward Earth. The moment it aligned, a pulse rippled through the lattice at the edge of the system. Telescopes quivered with static. Radio signals screamed with noise. Power grids flickered in cities across the globe. And yet it was silent. No message, no sound. Only the undeniable weight of being observed. For the first time, humanity felt not like the discoverers, but the discovered. Governments scrambled to contain the panic. Official channels dismissed the eye as a trick of reflection. But leaked observatory footage circulated online, and millions stared into that circle of light as though it stared back into them. What unsettled people most wasn't its alien quality, but its familiarity. The proportions of the glow, the golden ratio embedded in its arcs, the symmetry of the spirals, it all resembled the sacred patterns human civilizations had drawn for millennia. Mandalas, eyes of Horus, wheels of Dharma. The children of the ring declared it openly. The architects have turned their face toward us. And yet, what was that gaze measuring? Was it curiosity, indifference, judgment? The countdown pulses quickened again, vibrating through the lattice. It was as if the gaze had triggered a new phase. Astronomers noted the exact timing. Every beat now matched the rhythm of Earth's rotation, as though Atlas had locked onto our world. Coincidence? Or had the messenger chosen its subject? Night after night, people reported dreams of standing beneath vast starlit skies where the silver form loomed overhead. Some claimed they woke with equations scrawled in their minds, sequences they could not explain. Others whispered that the gaze wasn't just observation, it was communication, but no words came, only silence. And somehow, that silence was louder than any signal. The eye of Atlas remained fixed on Earth, and soon the silence began to fracture. Not in speech, not in any recognizable language, but in the spaces between frequencies. Radio astronomers first noticed it, a faint tremor hidden in the noise. Not a broadcast, but a modulation of Earth's own signals. Television static, internet packets, even whispers of brainwave frequencies all carried a subtle rhythm, as if the messenger was weaving itself into the background of human communication. At first, skeptics laughed. Pareidolia, they said, the human brain finding patterns where none exist. But then the patterns converged. Across continents, researchers isolated the same sequence, a pulse repeated in prime numbers, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. Then it reset and began again. Prime numbers, the universal language. This wasn't random interference. This was deliberate. The realization struck like lightning. Atlas wasn't just looking, it was reaching out. But the contact wasn't clean. Every attempt to decode the sequence revealed more than data. Listeners reported sensations, chills, tingling in their skin, sudden surges of emotion. A few swore they heard faint whispers under the rhythm, words in languages they did not know, yet somehow understood. Governments tried to shut down the chatter, but the internet flooded with pirate recordings of the whisper frequency. People stayed up late listening, hypnotized by the strange comfort it seemed to carry. Some claimed it gave them visions of vast cities floating in the void. Others said it drew them into nightmares of collapse and fire. The Children of the Ring released a declaration. The architects are calling us home. They urged followers to abandon technology, to prepare for ascension. Meanwhile, in hushed laboratories, physicists whispered something far more unsettling. The primes were not a greeting. They were a test. The sequence shifted. After the primes came geometry, waveforms that, when plotted, created maps of the solar system. But in every map, one orbit was highlighted. Earth. Why Earth? What did Atlas want here, at the edge of the sun's warmth, staring across light years of silence to fix its gaze on us? The countdown surged again. Faster. Louder. As if the test was over and the response was expected. But humanity had no idea what to say, and so the question hung in the void, heavier than any transmission. If we were being spoken to, what would silence cost us? As the prime number whispers spread, the world's response fractured like glass under pressure. Some scientists urged caution, pleading that humanity needed to decode the sequence before reacting. "This may be our first real test," said Dr. Ramos of the Geneva Institute, her face pale under the studio lights. "The primes are an invitation, but an invitation to what?" Others weren't waiting. In cities from Cairo to Los Angeles, cults of the Children of the Ring held midnight vigils. Followers sat in circles with radios tuned to static, listening as though awaiting scripture. Candles flickered, their flames swaying in rhythm with the unseen pulses. For them, Atlas wasn't a threat, it was a messiah. Governments, however, treated it as a looming weapon. Military satellites began repositioning. Naval fleets spread silently across oceans, and in underground bunkers, physicists worked under the weight of a new mandate: respond. But no one could agree how. One camp argued to mirror the primes back at Atlas, to signal comprehension. Another demanded silence, to remain hidden, to avoid revealing weakness. A third faction proposed embedding human languages into the sequence, turning the test into a dialogue. But which language? Which voice? Whose message would represent the entire human race? The debate grew toxic, and as it did, the pulses changed again. Instead of primes, the whispers now carried something new: harmonics. When charted, they resembled waveforms, intricate fractal patterns that hinted at dimensions beyond 3. To the mathematicians, it looked like a map. To theologians, a prophecy. To the frightened masses, an ultimatum. Protests erupted across the globe. In New Delhi, marchers carried signs, "Say nothing." In Washington, others shouted, "Speak before it's too late." Riots broke out in Berlin when footage leaked of satellites firing test beams into the upper atmosphere, a desperate rehearsal for a reply. And then came the night when everything changed. At 2:17 a.m. GMT, a small radio telescope array in Chile went dark. Its operators reported a deafening surge, as though every frequency on Earth had been hijacked. For precisely 60 seconds, all communications, from satellites to cell phones, carried the same pulse. No voice, no words, only the sound of a single heartbeat. It was low, resonant, and unmistakably alive. The children of the ring wept with joy. Governments scrambled to contain the footage, and scientists stared at their monitors in disbelief. The conclusion was unavoidable. Atlas was no longer just watching, it was listening, and it wanted an answer. After the heartbeat, silence returned. But it was not the same silence. It was charged, like the pause before lightning. Teams across the world scrambled to interpret what had just happened. In Geneva, Dr. Ramos locked herself in her office, replaying the pulse until her ears rang. "It's not a heartbeat," she muttered. "It's an equation." She wasn't alone. Across the globe, mathematicians noticed something hidden in the waveform. Not just rhythm, but ratios. The spacing between each thump aligned with values embedded in fundamental constants. Planck's length, the speed of light, the golden ratio. The heartbeat wasn't biological, it was mathematical, as though Atlas had offered humanity the opening line of a problem. The question was, could we solve it? But not all agreed it was a puzzle. To many it felt like judgment. News networks replayed the sound over eerie footage of cities at night, their skylines glowing under the stars. Anchors asked, was this a warning, a countdown, or an invitation we dare not refuse? Fear deepened when astronomers noticed subtle shifts in the lattice at the edge of the solar system. The structures were moving, aligning in ways that resembled geometry, hexagons, spirals, and arcs, like a cosmic lock waiting for the right key. Meanwhile, ordinary people reported strange phenomena. Farmers claimed their livestock grew restless whenever the heartbeat replayed. Pilots described sudden interference, instruments spinning as though pulled by unseen tides. And thousands of civilians confessed to recurring dreams, vast silver corridors stretching into infinity, with the heartbeat echoing through the walls. For governments, time was running out. A secret summit was convened, drawing leaders into a bunker beneath the Arctic ice. The agenda: decide humanity's reply. Some urged silence, terrified that any response would invite catastrophe. Others argued silence itself might be seen as defiance. "Doing nothing," one official said grimly, "is still an answer." But Dr. Ramos delivered the sharpest warning. She pointed to her equations, her trembling hands scribbling circles on the chalkboard. "It's not just a message," she insisted. "It's a test. If we fail to respond, the experiment ends. And when experiments end, subjects are discarded." Her words sent chills through the room, and yet no consensus emerged. By dawn, the summit adjourned in deadlock. Above them, Atlas's gaze remained fixed, its eye glowing brighter with each passing hour. The heartbeat echoed once more, louder this time, and for the first time, the pulse fractured into two distinct beats, like the opening lines of a duet. The message was clear. The conversation had begun, but humanity still stood mute at the threshold. When the fractured summit ended without resolution, the cracks in humanity's unity widened into chasms. For the first time in recorded history, the question wasn't about politics, borders, or even survival. It was about what words, if any, should be spoken to something that might not be human at all. The heartbeat pulsed again that night, louder, synchronized across every radio, every satellite, every phone. Entire cities seemed to vibrate. Windows rattled in unison. Children woke crying from the same dream. corridors of light stretching endlessly, voices whispering, "Answer." The pressure was unbearable. Governments broke rank. In Moscow, an encrypted signal was launched toward Atlas without consultation, a burst of mathematical primes repeated 3 times. To them, it was a cautious handshake. To others, it was reckless, a trigger that could never be unpulled. Within hours, Beijing followed with a different signal, a string of binary encoding a human genome compressed into pulses of light. "If they wish to know us," a Chinese official declared, "they will know us fully." But Washington had its own plan. At an underground facility in Nevada, engineers had been preparing a reply probe, a small craft fitted with quantum lasers designed to beam a universal constant, hydrogen's spectral fingerprint, the building block of matter itself. Their launch was scheduled for dawn. Suddenly, humanity was no longer speaking with one voice. It was shouting, incoherent, across the void, and Atlas noticed. The heartbeat quickened. Instead of steady thuds, it splintered into irregular bursts, echoing through the electromagnetic spectrum like a drumline growing impatient. When translated into graphs, the waveform was chaotic, jagged, almost irritated. In Chile, Dr. Ramos stared at the patterns with growing horror. "We're confusing it," she whispered. "It's like too many people shouting at once. The experiment is breaking." But the world wasn't listening. Protests erupted as leaks confirmed multiple nations had acted independently. Crowds filled the streets, demanding silence, demanding unity. Some knelt in prayer, others hurled rocks at government buildings. The children of the ring declared the age of nations was over. "Only Atlas is sovereign now," they preached. Then, at 3:03 a.m. GMT, the first reply came, not from Earth, but from Atlas. The lattice at the solar system's edge shimmered. Observatories reported hexagonal structures aligning like gears in a clock. The heartbeat ceased. In its place came a new sound. 3 descending tones, deep and resonant, like the toll of cathedral bells across space. The tones repeated 7 times, and then silence. No one could agree what it meant. But for millions listening across the world, one interpretation chilled them to the bone. The tones weren't a reply, they were a countdown. The 3 descending tones, repeated 7 times, spread terror like wildfire. Scientists scrambled to decode the meaning. Was it a sequence, a threat, a ritual? Dr. Ramos locked herself inside the Geneva control room, replaying the tones until her hair stood on end. "It's not music," she said. "It's structure. The tones match orbital resonances, like planets aligning. It's preparing something." Her warning spread too late. Across the globe, chaos erupted. Some believed the tones marked the beginning of a countdown, with only 7 cycles left before Atlas revealed its true nature. Religious leaders filled airwaves, declaring judgment had arrived. Stock markets plunged. In New York, thousands gathered in Times Square, listening to the tones replayed on giant screens, their faces pale in the glow. But amid the fear, others saw opportunity. A coalition of rogue scientists, independent of any government, transmitted their own reply. They took the 3 tones and inverted them, sending the mirror image back into space. To them, it was the boldest act of communication yet. "We hear you. We understand your pattern. And we are capable of reflection." For 12 hours, there was nothing. Then, without warning, telescopes across the southern hemisphere detected motion in the lattice. One of the hexagonal structures, a vast silent shard of black geometry, shifted inward, crossing the invisible boundary of the heliosphere. For the first time, Atlas had entered the solar system proper. Panic spread. "It's coming!" screamed headlines. Military radars scrambled to track the object, but its surface absorbed all signals, rendering it nearly invisible. Meanwhile, civilians began reporting something stranger. Dreams. Identical dreams. Millions of people across continents described the same vision, standing in vast halls of stone, watching a pendulum swing 7 times before shattering into light. When news of the dream epidemic broke, fear metastasized into dread. Was Atlas not just watching, but infiltrating the human mind? Governments debated striking the shard with nuclear weapons, but the fear of retaliation froze them. "You cannot punch the dark," said one general grimly, "not when the dark is staring back." And then, just as panic reached its peak, the tones sounded again, but differently this time. Instead of 7 cycles, there were only 6. The countdown had begun. The world held its breath. For the first time in history, humanity wasn't arguing about borders, ideologies, or gods. Everyone asked the same question, whispered in terror across every city and village. What happens when the bells reach 0? The 6th bell rolled across the sky like thunder wrapped in silence. No ear truly heard it, yet every heart felt it, a low resonance, as though the cosmos itself exhaled. For a moment, the world froze. Children stopped playing mid-laugh. Birds fell quiet on telephone wires. Even the hum of machines seemed to hesitate. Then the panic returned. Markets shut down, flights grounded, governments declared emergencies. The shard that had slipped past the heliosphere was no longer drifting. It was aligning. Its trajectory pointed not toward Earth, not toward Mars, but toward the sun itself. Astronomers stared at their screens in disbelief. The object's movement wasn't random, it was precise, mathematical, an orbit that spiraled closer and closer to the solar furnace, as though it were following choreography written billions of years ago. "This isn't intrusion," whispered Dr. Ramos, her voice hoarse from sleepless nights. "It's ignition." Theories erupted. Some claimed Atlas was feeding the sun, restoring it like a dying flame. Others feared it was the opposite, that the shard was a siphon, drinking the sun's energy, dimming it for purposes unimaginable. But the dreams told another story. Across the planet, millions dreamed again, this time of a clock made not of gears, but of galaxies. The pendulum swung 6 times, and each swing sent ripples through star systems like pebbles thrown into an infinite pond. In the dream, people screamed, but no sound emerged. Governments clashed over how to respond. Nuclear launch codes were readied. Space agencies begged for time, for data, for caution. And then, deep beneath the Pacific, in a forgotten naval facility, a desperate act was set in motion. A black budget weapon, a tungsten rod fitted with experimental propulsion, was aimed at the shard. No permission was sought, no warnings given. At 02:22 GMT, the weapon launched. Humanity struck first. For 32 seconds, the world exhaled hope. Then came the reply. The shard flickered. A shimmer spread across its surface like liquid glass. The tungsten rod disintegrated mid-flight, reduced to dust before impact. No explosion, no fireball, just absence, as though it had never existed. And then the 5th bell tolled. The countdown had quickened. The transition from 6 to 5 was not subtle. It was violent. The 5th bell wasn't just sound, it was force. Seismographs across the globe spiked. Tides swelled without warning, waves hammering coastlines from Japan to California. Earth itself seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the bell, as though dragged into Atlas's symphony. Fear metastasized into something worse. Resignation. News anchors wept on live broadcasts. Entire villages gathered in silence, waiting for the next toll. Conspiracy forums flooded with claims that the end date was now fixed, that each bell marked a planetary sacrifice. 6 for Mars, 5 for Earth, 4 for the Sun. But amid despair, a spark of defiance flickered. A coalition of rogue astronomers, hackers, and former astronauts called themselves the Resonance. They believed the tones were not death knells but equations, a dialogue humanity had misread as doom. The bells aren't warnings, their manifesto read. They are invitations. Working from secret observatories in the Andes, the resonance hijacked radio telescopes and crafted a reply. Not mathematics, not DNA, not hydrogen. Instead, harmony. They took the bells, shifted them into chords, layered human voices humming alongside. A reply that said, "Not we are numbers, but we are music." For 40 hours, silence stretched. Then, for the first time, the shard responded. Light spilled across its surface, a lattice of patterns resembling constellations rearranging themselves. The glow was faint but undeniable, as though the shard had turned its face toward Earth. The world trembled. Was this acknowledgement? A reprieve? But hope dimmed when 3 days later the bells sounded again. Not 5, 4. The countdown was still falling. Only now Earth wasn't just listening. Earth was dreaming with it, and in those dreams a whisper emerged. Not in numbers, not in tones, but in words, clear and human. Come closer. The fourth bell did not arrive quietly. It tore the veil between dream and waking. Cities erupted in panic as the sky itself rippled, not with storms, but with luminous fractures, glowing veins of aurora that stretched across continents, shifting and snapping like broken glass. Radios screamed static, compasses spun without rest. For the first time, humanity realized the bells weren't just signals, they were instruments reshaping reality with each toll. Astronomers pointed trembling fingers at the sun. It flickered. Not a flare, not a CME, but something stranger. A shadow sliding across its surface as though a curtain were being drawn. Yet no celestial body was near enough to eclipse it. Dr. Ramos whispered the unthinkable. It's not consuming light. It's teaching us to see in the dark. The resonance, desperate, doubled their reply. They wove choirs with whale song, satellite hums, the beat of human hearts recorded from every continent. They broadcast into the void a single plea: we are ready, do not erase us. For 12 hours, the shard pulsed in rhythm. The sky's fractures stabilized, hope bloomed. Then, at the 13th hour, the fourth bell rang again, this time not across the earth, but from within it. Volcanoes stirred. Oceans surged. The very mantle seemed to shudder, as though answering the shard's music. Humanity wasn't just hearing the bells now, it was playing them. In sleep, the dreams grew sharper. People saw vast corridors of obsidian lined with stars. At the end of each hall stood a door, and behind the door, not terror, but invitation. Step through, the voice urged. Step closer. By dawn, millions awoke with the same phrase on their lips. The edge is not the end, it is the beginning. But the shard gave no reprieve. The third bell loomed. No one knew what would happen when the last bell struck. Some prayed it meant annihilation, others prayed it meant transcendence, but all agreed there was no turning back. The countdown fell to 3, 2, 1. The first strike came not as sound, but as silence so vast it swallowed oceans. Birds fell mid-flight, engines cut. For a breathless instant, Earth itself seemed to forget how to spin, and then came the final resonance. Not destruction, transformation. The sun blazed in patterns no human eye had ever seen. Hexagonal lattices, spirals of colour bending into shapes that whispered of geometry far beyond human math. The shard dissolved into the light, its structure scattering like seeds on cosmic winds. Every dream converged into one vision, Earth itself drifting across a threshold invisible until now. The solar system stretched outward like a hallway, and at its edge waited a vast, glowing door. Not a metaphor, but a structure of pure resonance, woven from gravity and song. The resonance's reply, human voices layered over cosmic tones, was no longer echo. It was harmony. The shard had not come to judge but to tune, to draw Earth into its orchestra. People awoke with tears, not fear. They realized the countdown had never been to extinction. It had been to entry. And so, as the final bell faded, Earth's orbit shivered, ever so slightly nudged. The planet began to drift, not away from the sun, not into the void, but along a hidden path that had always been there, waiting. To where, no one could say, but one truth remained, etched into human memory. The edge of the solar system was never the boundary, it was the door.